So it looks like we've got a good amount of people here. I think everyone is who's going to be here right at 3 is going to be here for now. So let's see. It looks like we have Emergent Reasons, Matthew Gukins, Moon Settler, Reardon, Flowy, myself, and the Bitcoin Cash podcast currently here. Welcome, everyone. I'm glad to have us all in the same room. It's really great. So I just wanted to kind of just set the tone up front real quick before we get started. This is intended to be an open discussion, not so much a debate. I do expect that, there might be some back and forth here and there. And I also understand for a lot of people, we might get onto some perhaps emotionally charged topics. I do hope to keep it purely technical. I don't want to get too deep into philosophical rabbit holes. Obviously, it's going to guide kind of everything that we do. I just want everyone to be mindful. So in times of disagreement, if we can appeal to data, anything that's quantifiable, let's try to do that. Otherwise, let's just kind of agree to disagree and move on. If it gets too fucked up, I'm just going to mass mute everyone. We're just going to chill out. I don't expect that to happen, but just setting the expectation up front. Let's see. So I guess the other thing that's probably important to note up front is in this space, when we say Bitcoin, that is neutral. That means all Bitcoins, including our other siblings, XCC, BSV, BTC, BCH, etc. So when the distinction actually matters, let's just name it by its specific chain, in this case, BTC or BCH. Otherwise, Bitcoin is pretty agnostic in my mind. It means the protocol, it means the idea more so than the actual network. So I think with those distinctions in mind, I think we can have a pretty productive discussion here. And the last thing that I think I want to say before I open up the floor is I think a lot of you maybe, if we've spoken before, have heard my concept of the Bitcoin metagame. That's kind of what we're talking about here, really. It's open source software. It's a permissionless protocol. And so that means anybody can use whatever software they want on their computer. You can run whatever code you want, right? So I'm running the node that represents the network that is Bitcoin to me. Somebody else might run a node that might connect to a different Bitcoin network, but using the same technology. And we're here today for technology. And so we're here to also celebrate the Bitcoin metagame. So with that, let's see. So yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So yeah, I think we can just do a short introduction for everybody who's here today, who's currently speaking. So I'll start with myself, and then I think Reardon was really excited to be here. So I think we'll pass the mic off to him, and then we can go from there. I'm Kallisti, so I'm a Bitcoin Cash developer. I'm the lead developer for the Selene wallet. I've been in Bitcoin Cash since about 2021. I first learned about Bitcoin in 2011, and I've been a programmer since the 3rd grade. So I really have a lot of passion for the technical side of things and trying to see how far we can push the limits with creating this global money system. And so with that, I want to open up the floor, and starting with Reardon, if you could just kind of introduce yourself, that'd be really cool.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Reardon, otherwise known as Brendan. I've been kind of open source software engineer for on and off for more than 20 years. And heard about Bitcoin from the very beginning. Also been an anarchist my whole life. So kind of a natural fit being a software engineer and an anarchist. Got into Bitcoin early on. Didn't make the leap into full-time Bitcoin work until 2006. Or sorry, that's ridiculous. Sorry, 6 years ago in 2018 when I went to work at Casa. And since then, I've basically been working on Bitcoin self-custody products with various companies, including BitGo and now Swan Bitcoin.
Cool. I'm really glad to have you and to hear your experience. I also see DevFD0 was able to join us today as well, so welcome. And I'm going to get Jeremy back up here too. Let me just hit that button. All right, cool. And then Matthew, how about you introduce yourself?
Hello everyone, I hope you can hear me properly. So yeah, I'm Mathieu. I'm a developer working on Bitcoin Cash. I work on CashScript, so that's a smart contract language for Bitcoin Cash, which compiles down to opcodes. and I'm the second developer. So the project is created by Roscoe Callis. I also maintain Cash and Ice. It's a Bitcoin Cash wallet. And I have worked on the application layer with an NFT project, an NFT mint. And I think that's the most important stuff.
Cool. All right. So I was not able to hear anything that Matthew said, but I pulled it up on my other phone. I just heard you were done talking. Sorry that I can't respond. Emergent, how about you go?
Hey, thanks. Yeah, I'm Emergent Reasons, ER, also known as John. And yeah, similar to Reardon, kind of same background there, about 20 years of development on and off. And then in Bitcoin since the days that it was unimaginable that there would be a split. And yeah, since then been building also full time since about 2019 on Bitcoin Cash and working on BCH Bull, the AnyHedge protocol, which I think might be of interest to some people who are looking at starting up new kinds of protocols, permissionless protocols on BTC, and also other things using the Flipstarter. So I helped with Flipstarter, which was an implementation very similar to the old Lighthouse, if anyone remembers that from back in the day when Mike Hearn was trying to get things working. But Flipstarter actually took off and has had a lot of usage, which has been great. So yeah, just working on various things full time in Bitcoin for quite a few years now.
Cool. Thank you. Glad to have you. And Moon Settler, I was really excited to learn that you were going to be joining us today. Can you please introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. So I like to tinker with cryptography, especially Schnorr stuff. I got very, very interested in Bitcoin around 2011. After Satoshi left, I remember it was summer after he left, and sadly I couldn't get into it, like really get into it until much later. But I was very interested in Bitcoin. I really loved the idea and read about it and stuff. And basically has spent a few years with doing nothing but digging into how Bitcoin works and engaging with developers and talking tech about Bitcoin. Lately, I have been taking a bit of a break from that, but I really wanted to be here with everyone.
I really wanted you to be here too, so thanks for coming. And Flowy, can you please introduce yourself as well?
Hello. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Oh, okay, just wondering since I have a headphone in, but the microphone comes from the phone. It's always a bit tricky with these things. So I've been a software developer for most of my life as well. I joined Bitcoin, I think the first patch I did in Bitcoin Core is 11 years ago. So, wow. Then worked on Bitcoin Classic with Gavin Andreessen, and then worked on Flowy and now Flowy Pay, which is basically a proper SPV wallet, all on Bitcoin Cash. So I've been on Bitcoin Cash basically from the day we forked off, and doing lots of little design stuff, which comes with the territory of having been doing this for 10 years now. That's me.
Cool. Awesome. And then FD0.
Hi everyone, I'm Floppy. I work on Joinster, which is the CoinJoin implementation, and mostly research about privacy, but involved in different things.
Cool. I really love Joinster. I've been really excited about the idea of doing CoinJoins over Nostr, like ever since Nostr came out. So that's really cool. And then Jeremy, how about you introduce yourself, and then we'll lead off with Flat after that.
Okay, hopefully everyone can hear me now. A bit buggy to start, but classic Twitter Spaces. I'm Jeremy. I got into Bitcoin in 2013 and have been involved pretty much the whole time. I had a lot less involvement 2018 to 2020, but then in 2021, I started the Bitcoin Cash podcast, and in 2022, I started Selene Wallet, which I'm still developing on at the moment. So that's it. Pretty heavy on the BCH side after getting censored in the infamous block size war. But that's a story for another time. And I'm really looking forward to this actually, because it's really good to get some fresh technical insights. I think sometimes, if you have a bit of a small community, things can just go in circles a little bit. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to hearing some fresh perspectives.
Cool. And then Vlad, would you introduce yourself, please?
Hi, I am Vlad. I'm the host of the Bitcoin Takeover podcast, which I have been doing for the past 5.5 years. I have a pretty interesting history with Bitcoin, but it's nice that you guys are finally getting together to discuss Bitcoin as an idea and the protocol as opposed to a single network. And I hope nobody here is going to be dogmatic. I don't want to talk about myself. I guess some of you have been on my podcast, and some of you I wish I would get you on my podcast. But this is useful, and I hope you're going to discuss some of the opcodes which are currently on BCH and BTC doesn't have.
Awesome. Yeah, that's definitely why we're here. And so I guess a good place to start might be if anyone wants to talk about a project that they're working on, or if we want to just get straight into details of the VM or whatnot. I kind of just want to open the floor to whoever has an idea. I feel like it can be a pretty loose discussion, and we'll just see where it goes. So if anyone wants to pick something to start with.
Maybe Riordan could summarize the state of the conversation over, the current Bitcoin proposals, because there is a lot, and it's very hard, very easy to lose track of everything, and what is the current thinking over OPCAT and covenants and stuff. And he's really into it daily, so maybe we could start with that.
Yeah, I think I would really love to hear where the current state of Bitcoin development, and I think it might be also useful later on to contrast that with the current state of BCH development, and maybe kind of figure out how do we actually get changes in. So yeah, where are we right now in BTC land?
Yeah, thank you. I just also want to say another thing I'd like to get into at some point later in this, right after this, or at some point, is also kind of understanding the potentially similar but different goals of the two networks. As I said, I've been focused on Bitcoin self-custody, so that's a very big focus of mine. But maybe there's something common or different about the goal of what we're trying to make Bitcoin be, and that's going to help us figure out what opcodes make sense and what don't for the two different networks, because they may have different goals. With that said, yeah, so the conversation around improving Bitcoin BTC scripting, obviously you guys know is better than many, that has stalled out for a long time. So the Taproot soft fork brought us a lot of upgrade hooks, including basically, instead of a limited set of NOP opcodes that we could replace with new opcodes for Bitcoin script, with Taproot, we switched those to op successes, and then took all of the other kind of namespace for opcodes and made everything in there that wasn't currently used also an op success, which gives us, I think it's 80 total potential additional opcodes for Bitcoin BTC script. What's been interesting is that after Taproot, which gave us all this additional upgrade capacity, no one's actually used it in the last 3 years. So I kind of started into this conversation about a year ago, and have been trying to move that conversation forward. Overall, the main thing that has been kind of accepted as a yes, we want to do this in some way on BTC, is we want to have some kind of introspection covenant. Certainly, we want to have an output introspection covenant, the simplest of which would be check template verify, which asserts the contents of all of the outputs of a transaction and very little of the input side. So that's kind of the base covenant that we could add to Bitcoin. And when I first started down this, I want to upgrade Bitcoin path, that was what I was focusing on because it is the simplest. The conversation was shifted early this year, I guess in April, when Rusty Russell, longtime Linux kernel and Bitcoin developer, came to Austin, Texas with his script restoration proposal. And the shift there was, why are we trying to do the minimum covenant on Bitcoin BTC script? Shouldn't we be trying to make Bitcoin script the best that it can be? Which I know over on the Bitcoin Cash side, that's what you've been doing for years, is trying to make Bitcoin script the best that it can be. Shouldn't we also be doing that on Bitcoin? Now, we may have different goals for the network, but it should be the best that it can be for the goals of the network. And so that was the message that Rusty brought to Austin. And that's shifted the conversation a bit. Maybe we shouldn't be doing the very minimum thing. Maybe we should be doing something that really enables the functionality that's going to serve Bitcoin users the best that it can. And with that conversation, along with the Taproot Wizards doing their clown show, but also technical work, I think there really has been a big shift in the mindset of those trying to upgrade the Bitcoin BTC network. And now there's kind of a question of, do we try to build all the way to Rusty's script restoration project goal, which would bring us kind of a very full expressive language? I was talking with, who was it? I was talking on X with someone about the different limitations and how you protect from DOS within script. And actually the result of Rusty's proposal would be more flexible number computations than what Bitcoin Cash currently has. So it would be in some ways more expressive, in some ways less, but it would be a big upgrade to Bitcoin BTC script. So that's one option that's out there right now, is Rusty script restoration, get full big number mathematics, all the bit shifting opcodes back, multiplication, division, modulo, also get basic cryptographic primitive, which is the tap tweak of some sort, also full introspection in the form of optx and optx hash. That's like the big thing. And then in between there, we have Roast Beef, the CTO of Lightning Labs, who kind of recently became one of the BIP maintainers. And he proposed, let's make something that gets a lot of that functionality, kind of the 80-20 rule, where we have, he thought of 4 opcodes: check template verify, check sig from stack, which you guys call check data sig, cat, because cat's kind of the simplest opcode you can add that lets you manipulate objects on the stack in a meaningful way, and then tweak add, which we need, and you guys don't as much because we have Taproot. So with Taproot, you can't have a script that produces a next output unless you have the ability to do an elliptic curve tweak operation. So we need tweak add in order to even do basic output creation from a script. And so that's the Roast Beef opcodes: CTV, check sig from stack, cat, and tweak add. And that's what I'm currently kind of focused on working towards. I think it's a good in-between to get us 80% of the benefit with much less work than finishing the whole script restoration.
Yes. So the one thing I wanted to mention is that the basic idea of the great script restoration, aside from re-enabling big int arithmetics, which was originally in Bitcoin, and re-enabling the opcodes that have been disabled safely, is this idea that you basically can relax the arbitrary script limits that make the developers suffer, in a way where you basically estimate the computational expense of the script, or all the scripts in a block, using the memory footprint of the operation. So basically the new script VM would keep track of the memory footprint and even could estimate the memory footprint and could calculate the cost of the operations based on that. And that is supposed to be making this whole thing safe, although I remember that quadratic hashing concerns were raised in regards to OptX hash, and I'm not sure how this actually fits into this. But I also know that BCH is going through very similar thought process and also is trying to relax the script limitations and reintroduce big integers. So maybe you guys could talk about how you see that.
Yeah, it looks like a merchant.
Yeah, hey, I'd like to ask for a little bit of a maybe further detail or clarification. So, Reardon, that was a great summary. So, is it fair to say, just initially, is it fair to say that the Rusty's proposal is kind of the most extensive one? That's basically correct, right?
Yeah, it sounded like the roast beef. I think that was a question.
It's a
Sorry,
completely
roast.
Sorry.
it's completely
So roast
workable
beef, roast
scripting.
beef is the limited ones, and then Rusty's is the most extensive. Yeah.
Right, Rusty's. So even in Rusty's, though, it sounded like you said the introspection. When you said introspection, you said just like two things, like optx and something else. Was that it? Is that the extent of the introspection in that proposal, or is there something more to it? I was trying to
Yeah, it would just be
understand that part.
optx and optx hash, and then you'd have a basically an extension by a field selector. So you could select any fields of the transaction using optx. So you'd be like transaction input, the 0th input, the script pub key as a 2-byte selector, and then you'd have optx to get that.
That's full
Okay, so it's
introspection.
so it's an op with a bunch of arguments. Okay, I get it. Thanks.
Yeah, so if I can jump in here. So indeed, great script restoration is most aligned with what we've been doing in Bitcoin Cash. So we've actually gone further, I would say, because we have with the cash tokens upgrade. So, but we can talk about that later. But specifically about the VM limits and the begins. So those are indeed two things that the great script restoration proposes that we currently don't have in Bitcoin Cash. So we still have the 520 byte limit for push operations, and we have the 201 opcode limit. So we inherited this from BTC. So from 2017, those have been untouched. And up to now, those have been limitations, especially when we didn't have native introspection. But once we got native introspection, already a lot could be done within those limits. So now there's a lot of work happening to rework those limits, and similar to what was mentioned already, it needs to take into account that not all operations are equal, of course. So signature checks and cryptography is more expensive, and also arithmetic on big integers is also more expensive than like regular stack operations, for example. So we're probably looking for something like that to lock it in Bitcoin Cash in November 15th. So it's currently still ongoing discussion, and that would mean activation next year in May. So that's currently also something we are looking at. So I think the technical community is somewhat exploring similar lines.
Yeah, for sure. I just popped up in the nest here a screenshot of Rusty's latest post on the topic on Noster, where he talks about his progress in benchmarking the different opcodes and how to budget for them. If you guys don't know, the budget mechanism he proposes is that for each byte size of your script, you get a certain amount of budget for CPU cost, basically, and then he gives kind of a set of here's how different operations subtract from that budget. So a basic stack operation is 1 cost per byte of stack operation. A multiplication or division is 2 cost per byte of stack operation, and then a hash is, I think, 8. So anyway, it's in the post here. So there's a way that you kind of make a budget and then subtract from it. I'm not sure if that's what you guys are doing as well, if you have something else you're doing.
I'm actually going to post the discussion on our targeted VM limits chip into the nest in just a moment as well. I'm just trying to get the link to that. And I would actually invite you guys to read that, read through that, some of the discussion that we've had. And I mean, even participate yourself if you see that to be fitting. I do actually wonder also if out of the 3 BTC devs that we have here on stage, if there's really any like awareness of the kind of tooling that we've been working on, or like the kind of script restoration that we've done here. Like, is that anything that you guys have independently looked into at all?
I mean, I certainly have been basically since I started working on the check sig from stack BIP for Bitcoin BTC. I looked in 2 places, one that had it, which was you guys, BCH, and then also in the elements for Liquid from Blockstream. There's 2 separate implementations there. They each have trade-offs, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, I took some bits from each when I made the BIP for check sig from stack on BTC. And then I realized how much else you guys have going on and started reading along there as well.
Yeah, I have been looking a little bit into the capabilities of Bitcoin Cash script VM, and like I was really bummed out when I tried to implement long port signatures. Of course, Bitcoin does not have opcat, so it was out of question. But I thought maybe I could implement in a very similar system on Bitcoin Cash, but I run into the script limits pretty fast, and basically it's not really feasible unless someone takes the pain of breaking the script up to multiple transactions, which is a possibility with this cash token kind of thing, if I understand it correctly. But that sounded like a pain in the ass. I would have liked it to keep clean and simple. So I'm really looking forward to the raising of script limits and playing with this stuff in the wild.
Kallisti, I have two questions, but very, very different things. But I don't know if you want to give time for other people to bring up topics.
It's I mean, like I said, it's a pretty open floor. So as it's pretty custom with my space, go ahead and speak your mind, and it'll just be a little less chaotic than they usually are. And be mindful we're on recording.
All right, great. So Reardon or anyone, you were talking about the goals of Bitcoin, and that is somewhat outside of the narrow technical scope that Kallisti is aiming for. But I'd be really interested at some point to hear what you guys have as a goal for BTC, and I wonder if it's going to be similar to what I think. And then I'm sure some of us would be happy to share what our goals are for BCH and achieving with BCH. And I'd be very interested to hear again whether that's similar to what you imagine or not. But on the technical side, I'd like to ask, does anyone know the people from Atomic Finance? So back in the day when we were starting the AnyHedge protocol, there was Atomic Finance, which was planning to use Taproot. And it seems like they completely changed the design from what they originally had planned and so forth. Does anyone know what's going on there? Because I was hoping that would be something interesting, kind of like a parallel development, but it seems like they kind of peeled off and did something else. Is anyone aware of what they've done?
They were trying to do DLC based options and stuff, right? Or was that someone else?
Yeah, well, the old original design was they were going to use mass to basically calculate every possible outcome and then sign every possible outcome, and then they would choose the correct one at the end. So it was a little bit of a pseudo custodial setup.
Yeah,
but
that's a
but
DLC.
It seems like they've
that's
completely changed it since then. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's what a DLC is. You pre-calculate the possible states of the contract at the end. You half sign them with a signature adapter, or an adapter signature, and then an oracle, which can be one of the parties or can be some other party that has the data on the outcome. In the case of a price, you can have a price oracle that just posts their half signature for the price, and you can combine that with the pre-signatures you did at the beginning of the contract to resolve the contract. So that's kind of the DLC concept you're talking about there. I briefly worked with a company called Lava, and I just linked their latest loans protocol into the nest here. They're doing something similar using DLC contracts or discrete log contracts, to be repetitive, with those kinds of pre-signatures and an oracle to resolve based on price at the end.
Right. Okay. Yeah. And I thought they were going to do that, and it seemed pretty interesting. But then last time I looked, it looked like something completely different. So anyway, maybe nobody's aware of exactly what they're doing here.
Yeah, I don't know.
Are there any interesting DLC things out there that are out in the wild that are running?
I only worked briefly with the Lava folks. I don't know to what degree they're in production, but they're working hard to get it into production. Their loans, DLC based loans protocol. I expect they'll have something soon in production.
Okay, thanks.
A couple of little details. We on Bitcoin Cash introduced 64-bit big integers already a little while ago. So it's not the 32-bit ones that I'm guessing BTC still uses. But yes, we're going for the proper big ones that Satoshi initially did. This is part of the virtual machine limits idea, as far as I know. I haven't actually read the latest version. And there was a comment about Rusty's proposal how to do counting of work. This is very, very similar to what I proposed on the virtual machine limits in February this year. So I'm guessing that was independent. I'm not actually the writer or developer. I just added the comment there, so I have no idea if they actually used it, but I'm just pointing it out because that means we have considered it.
Nice.
Yeah, so
I think it was like this parallel evolution thing. We kind of saw these thoughts pop out of Rusty's mind one after the other. I mean, Reardon was there, I was not, but like it was a pretty real-time trackable thought experiment that led to the great script restoration.
yeah, I agree. There's obviously some cross-pollination going on. I think at least both kind of camps are vaguely aware of what the other ones are doing. So just for the Bitcoin Cash VM limits, the link is posted one time for the research forum, and I posted it directly to the proposal. So if I can just read the bullet points, and everyone kind of has an ID. So first of all, the ID is to remove the 201 opcode limit. And also the byte the stack limit length from 520 bytes would be raised to 10,000, as it's mentioned in the second bullet. Then it says a new operation cost limit is introduced, limiting the contracts to approximately 700 bytes pushed to the stack per spending transaction byte. So I think that's kind of similar what was mentioned before with the budget. But I think for contract developers, the most noticeable limits will be hashing. The hashing digest limited. So if you want to do a ton of hashing, this might be relevant, but otherwise you're limited to 10,000 bytes. So that's kind of all contract developers would need to know. So instead of 520 bytes, there would be a 10,000 bytes limit. And you can find the link if you want any further details.
And the reasoning for that budget is that some of the like hashing and signatures and so forth, they're like multiple orders of magnitude higher in computation cost, and so it kind of becomes silly to do detailed accounting down in the third, fourth, fifth digits of your CPU budget. So yeah, those are accounted for currently by having separate limits on those things, where we just limit them to avoid DOS and that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's similar on so interestingly on Bitcoin in TapScript, we already raised the ops limit. I believe it is it totally removed Moonsettler, or is it still 10,000? I can't remember. Anyway, the ops limit was raised already in TapScript, as was the script size limit in bytes. I don't know if you guys have raised the byte size limit of scripts. In TapScript, there's no byte size limit to the script itself. It can be any size.
No, so we're still
That's
using
how you get the
4
megabyte block, right?
Oh.
I wasn't quite able to hear. I heard Jeremy say something about a 4 megabyte block, but I didn't quite hear what Matthew said.
Well, that was why the inscriptions can be up to 4 megabytes, right? Because there's no limits on the script. So yep. that's the same thing, right? That's okay. I just checking that and misunderstood that. So I guess that's kind of a case where it's highly relevant. Yeah, that everybody knows you kind of got to get the limits right, because if you just put no limit, then the world might be a bit bigger than you expect, right? So I think that's why it's quite not controversial exactly, but it's being well scrutinized at the moment in the BCH camp, because if we raise the limits, if you do them too low, then it's kind of pain in the ass. You got to do it, multiple times. And if you raise it too high, then it's kind of hard to go back. So I think that's why it's heavily topical at the moment.
Yeah, and I'll say just from my personal perspective, from the BTC side, the fact that ordinals can, if they pay the whole fee for the whole block, they can take up the whole block. I have no problem with that. I think that's getting into kind of the trade-offs between BTC and BCH, because we have a block weight limit of 4 megaweight. That means that you're going to have to pay if you want to use up all that space. And so that's part of why it makes it okay for us to not have a limit on individual script size, because you're not going to have a dynamic block size where you can gradually push up the block size and get away with doing that for a low cost.
Yeah, that makes sense. So in a way, you kind of have an economic limit, which is quite interesting. That's not actually directly in the VM. Obviously, that's subject to the market conditions as well. I hadn't actually thought about that angle of it.
Yeah, it's a weird trade-off there, and I've posted to some controversy in Bitcoin circles that I wouldn't be surprised if Bitcoin does go to dynamic block size at some point in the future, when we can internalize some similar economic limit on it. And right now we just don't have a mechanism to account for the economic cost of larger blocks. So we just have a fixed block size limit. On your side, you can limit how much people can do with other limits so that they also are not abusing the block size that is dynamic.
Yeah, I mean, if I recall correctly, we have a maximum transaction size of a megabyte, and then the maximum, I think, bytecode length for like how much script you can put into an input is still pretty low, like something, what is it, like 10 kilobytes, something like that, right? So, I mean, we don't want to be able to abuse the block space. The whole premise being a cache system, we want to be able to send financial information, but not necessarily like a whole JPEG. We have other better storage solutions for that. And I think BTC people and BCH people are pretty aligned on that, unlike one of our other siblings that we don't even need to mention.
Yeah, no. So I want to jump in there because I think it is actually valuable to mention them, because it is a good example of what you get if you have pretty much no scripting limits, but then you don't have any opcodes to optimize anything. So we're talking about BSV here. So they had to do governance. They had to emulate the whole cryptography in script. So they had to do like ECDSA checks because there was no check signature from stack. And I don't think they didn't use the Schnorr trick you could do with CAT. So they were, at least with Schnorr signatures, you can do a little optimization. But in BSV, they did the most ridiculous thing. So you needed for one covenant transaction, you would need a megabyte worth of transaction data to do the cryptography in script itself. So that's also a bit of a warning. Even, for example, if you only activate CAT, you can see that's maybe the most safe option. But because we know there is a lot of demand for like a smart contract use cases, or at least many VC-backed people want to experiment with this, this will just mean that you get ridiculous amounts of block space taken up in this kind of schemes. And at least with BSV, they would just get enormous blocks. But with BTC and a 1 to 4 megabyte block size limit, this would mean the throughput for normal people would get limited further, and the fees would probably go up if these venture capital backed like Bitcoin smart contract firms get to bid up all the space for CAT covenants. So I think optimizing opcodes is really is a really important lesson from what we learned from BSV.
And even if you don't go as extreme as they did, still a good warning and learning experience to see from the outside about what happens if you take a kind of risk approach, RISC, right? Risk approach too seriously or take it too far. And that's something that you guys should be aware of, right? Because I'm just sure you are, but there's an example out there that serves as a warning that if you take that too seriously and you do things too simply, and you say no, we want to do the absolute minimum change, then the end result is you end up having very risky, dangerous covenants and smart contracts out there, because now you're all of the logic is all in the hands of random developers. So yeah, it's something
I've been saying that about CAT for I think a couple months now. Once I kind of accepted that CAT probably didn't have major underlying risks to the system stability, I was like, okay, so cat's fine, but doing cat alone and not other ways of doing introspection is dumb because people are going to use it in ways that are going to have bugs. We're going to go the path of other coins we don't need to talk about, where there's constantly bugs in the contracts because it's too hard to write good contracts with cat.
Yeah, it's bonkers, and it's expensive too, right? It takes a lot of space, which is at a premium for BTC. So yeah, and just the errors and the danger of it is very serious. It's
Yes.
very hard to do that stuff correctly, right? You have to basically have a formal validation for pretty much everything you do. You can't get away with any
Yes.
casual coding at all.
You probably need to write like a higher level language that compiles down. I think that's kind of the approach that they try to take with BSV. That was their thinking, that they will just write contracts in a higher level language and it will be compiled down. So I as a side note, I checked out the thing that Riordan asked in the meantime, and yes, so maximum script size does not apply in Taproot, the 10,000 byte limit. The 201 non-push opcode limit was also removed, and the SIGO budget is applied per script. So it is applied for the script. It's 50 plus the total serialized size of the script. Or the bytes of the transaction inputs witness. Yeah. So that's kind of how Taproot raised the limits already.
And speaking of a higher level language, Floppy posted a link to our cache script documentation, which is exactly that. It's a higher level language similar to Solidity that compiles down into Bitcoin script. And he's got his hand up, so I don't know if that's what you wanted to mention. Go ahead, Floppy.
There are a few things I like in Bitcoin Cash, and Cash script is one of them. I wish we had something similar in Bitcoin. I think Jeremy has tried something with CPU, but it's not really used by anyone for smart contracts right now. So it's not easy to build things, not even proof of concepts using opcodes. So a language like CashScript could really help developers to build things. The other thing which I really liked is you have a lot of projects, scripts, and proof of concepts in Bitcoin Cash that are using Opcat. So it was easy for me to understand how it really works and what all possible things you can do with Opcat.
Yeah, I'm one of those people who have a perverse love for this ASM like script, raw script of code. So I actually kind of like that, and these higher level abstractions are alien to me a bit. But I totally understand that, and above a certain size and contract complexity, it's really just not a good idea. So long you are just playing around really with a dozen or a few dozen opcodes and in complexity, I think it's super fun, but I wouldn't really want to write anything truly complex and something that needs to be error free and like extensively uses the alt stack and stuff like that. That's just going to be a nightmare.
We have some published articles from our company, General Protocols, where because we did back in 2018, right, when we just barely had covenants, and it was all opcat pretty much, right? Like that's all we had, and much lower limits, only 32-bit integers and so forth. And we have several articles that explain how things opened up and how things got safer, smaller, more compact, etc., easier to develop. So if you guys are interested in those, I'll maybe you could DM me or whatever, and I'll share those. But it was a huge, like night and day, gigantic improvement, both with larger integers and with introspection, with native introspection. Both of those are just massive quality of life improvements and safety improvements.
Yeah, so CashCubed was mentioned, so now I need to jump in, of course. But one thing about the tooling is, yeah, there is no one perfect or one right way to do it. So also we have CashCrypt, which is based on syntax. It's based on Solidity, so it will. But of course, the underlying mechanisms are very different than global state programming. But we also have another smart contract language. It's called Spedden. It's more similar to Haskell. So people can kind of pick and choose their preference, and maybe in the future there might be even different and novel approaches. And there have been complex things built also in raw script. The most recent example, or semi-recent, is JEDEX. This is an AMM DEX on Bitcoin Cash, so it's in demo stage. It has like a working proof of concept. And this is built in the BitHot IDE. So this is a web interface and an online IDE for developing with script, and then you get highlighting and you can see the stack evolve. So this is a very helpful general tool in our arsenal. So we in CashScript we linked them actually. So if you want to debug something, you can always go down to the low level and see the compiled opcodes, because usually with native introspection, it's quite simple still to see how the expressions from CashScript map to the low-level compiled opcodes. The main thing that is abstracted away with CashScript is you don't need to think about stack management. So you don't need to worry about the alt stack or like these op rolls or like op picks. This is just everything, all things you can forget about. So you can just name your variable and think like you are used to in programming, just about the variable names. And you don't need to worry where in the stack it is buried, like is it deep in the stack. The compiler will try to optimize it for you. So I think this is really something many developers will want, because it's just extra overhead, mental overhead that can be abstracted away by tooling.
Yeah, but by the way, like a very, very simple opcode could also just like leave these worries completely, because you already have an opcode, I believe, that you can use to pick out arbitrarily deeply buried item from the stack. So you can basically create on the stack this memory area where you have blocks basically acting as variables, but you cannot update them. You cannot update them without digging it up. So that's kind of the one thing that is missing. You could create a pair of opcodes of peek and poke or whatever, and you could just do the same thing in ASM pretty simply and in a straightforward manner. But we are cursed with a weird stack machine, and I think it was partly kept this cumbersome and hard to use on purpose for some fucked up reason. And also I would like to mention, just because we have enumerated these alternative scripting developments, the other side of the horse is basically simplicity that Blockstream is working on, that has like nine basic instructions, let's say, and from that you can build up very, very complex and pretty well serializable non-Turing complete logic, supposedly, and it's formally verifiable. It's like a giga project they have going, and it's probably never going to end and never going to make it to Bitcoin, but I just wanted to mention it, that there is something like that going on. And obviously that would be used as well as a higher level language compiled down to this opcode like or serialized stuff. I don't want to waste more words on it. I just wanted to mention that something like that is going on as a research.
I think the other thing worth mentioning in the context of these higher level languages is also Miniscript. I don't know if you guys on the BCH side are familiar with Miniscript.
Actually.
So Miniscript, instead of being a programming language like CashScript or this Haskell-like language or Sapio from Jeremy Rubin, which are kind of all programming languages that compile down to script, Miniscript is a predicate language where you can write simple predicates and they will compile down to scripts. And that's another useful tool. Yeah. And I think it does reflect, to some degree, a philosophical difference where on the, historically at least, on the BTC side, everyone's been thinking of script as a predicate verification system as opposed to a programming system. And then on the BCH side, you've been looking at it more as a programming system. And I think actually both views are useful. And frankly, we could really, really benefit over on BTC from something like CashScript And you guys may also be able to benefit from something like Miniscript, because in many cases, your contracts are just predicates, but in other cases, they're also programs. So
yeah, so we have looked into Miniscript, at least Roscoe and I, a little bit. And it seems from us, that the biggest benefits was the formal validation also. So, for example, it makes it easier to reason about things like malleability and making proofs. And CashScript is more, I would say, focused on developer experience. So to have a very good and accessible language. And also, the compiler is only half of the project, or maybe less than half, because a big part is the SDK, so the JavaScript software development kit. So this is how you actually build transactions easily with these smart contracts. And you have integrated debugging. So if an opcode fails, then this is simulated locally in a kind of mock network virtual machine. And then it tells you to which CashScript line this maps. So it will just tell you, oh, your contract failed on line 6, for example, and then it can throw a custom error. So we have all kinds of niceties built in. And it seems that Miniscript is going more the formal, or a bit more the academic route, less than the targeting, like, for example, JavaScript developers who are like not used to any of that kind of tooling.
Yeah, I think the important thing that Miniscript adds is you can build cross wallet and hardware wallet support for basically undefined types of wallets, so long they remain in this predicate world. And that might be helpful, but I'm pretty sure there are other ways to accomplish the same functionality, the same user experience that people expect from this, with like a full language and more complex contracts as well. So I don't really think this is absolutely necessary, but it is a nice thing, really, that you can actually review the script on, let's say, your hardware wallet device, your signing device. You can actually, it's dense enough to actually review your predicate logic and compare it to that it does exactly what you want, and nobody has been messing with it or something like that.
I also see a future, I mean, just thinking about the wallet front, where we've abstracted away a lot of the more common operations that we do with smart contracts. And I'll just be able to go into my wallet and choose from some standardized list of transactions, just pop in some inputs on how that contract is supposed to behave. And I won't even have to think about script anymore, because we've already figured out these really low level things. I think we've even already seen this in Ethereum, where there's almost like a standard library of contracts. And the really beautiful thing that I see about Bitcoin script is its composability, especially on BCH with the cash tokens upgrade, where we can output state to an NFT, allowing it to be used as input to another contract. And with introspection as well, I just see a lot of potential for expressibility there that we'll be able to build on top of from the user facing tools rather than the development facing tools.
yeah, and I think it's a good thing to bring up, the token protocol being able to externalize some state to basically a global state machine. And I think it's a useful distinction. I think it's pretty clear at this point that BTC will never have any kind of a global state machine like that. And so, while we can share a lot of things between the two systems, that's one that we won't be able to share.
Yeah, so it's not really a global state
Yeah,
machine.
no, it's not a global state machine. No.
Yeah, so what it is, it still just uses local state. It adds some extra information to the UTXO. So the information is still local to the UTXO. It can't be accessed by any other contract unless they are consuming that UTXO. So of course you can create a self-replicating UTXO, which would have like a no transaction ID, of course, but could have the same token information and the same balance, the same locking bytecode. So this way you can have like self-replicating contracts, similar covenants, which are long, live for a long time, but then they can share their state. So and you can actually do something similar, because the root problem you need to solve for kind of token schemes is detached proofs. And Jason Dreisner, the author of Cash Tokens, wrote a great blog post on this. So the root problem is detached proofs. And with SegWit, it is probably possible to create such a detached proofs on BTC. So probably, even if people don't want it, you can create some kind of script enforced token scheme, which adds some complexity to the governance discussion on BTC.
I wasn't fully able to follow you there, and I would actually love to understand more. So the cash tokens is state attached to the UTXO.
Yes,
And
and it
send a cash
forces
token,
the replication of the contract, the origin contract. If I understand it correctly, that's how you can check what you are interacting with. That you have these special data attached to the UTXO that needs to be replicated, basically, for it to be consensus valid. And that's how your contract can check that you are interacting with the introspection of codes and stuff, that you are interacting with the contract that you wanted with.
Wait,
okay,
I think you might be mixing up with a design from a different design that didn't get implemented called op group and some similar ones. But there isn't any kind of transference of contracts or anything like that. The NFTs are, the whole design of cash tokens went through many months, more years of like painstaking design to make sure that it had zero impact on scaling, because that's, as you can imagine, that's extremely important to us. So yeah, no, they're basically just UTXOs. You should really just think of them as UTXOs. But Matthew could probably say more because he works with them more often about kind of the features of the UTXOs. But really, they're just UTXOs. There's no kind of global state whatsoever.
So is each individual token balance a UTXO, or is the token contract for all the tokens of a given
No,
ticker
there's no global state. There's no shared contract among a token or anything like that. That just doesn't exist.
Okay.
Yeah, so I can speak to this further. So first of all, it was done in a backwards compatible way, meaning that it's still transaction version 2 that's using cash tokens, but they have a special flag in the as part of the locking bytecode. So the simplest to explain first the fungible tokens. So there is a token genesis. This is when all the fungible tokens of a certain token ID of a certain token category are created. And to create a token, so to do such a token genesis, you need a UTXO with vouch 0. So you need an unspent output that has a vouch 0, and then that transaction ID of that UTXO will be used as the token ID. So this way, of course, each transaction will only have one vouch 0. So this way, only each token can have one genesis output as used as input. So in this setup transaction, you create all the fungible tokens then, and you have them as part of the output UTXOs. So they just have numbers. And if you add up all the fungible tokens in all the outputs of the genesis, you have the genesis supply. And so for these fungible tokens, there is a few consensus rules, namely that there cannot be more fungible tokens in the outputs than there are in the inputs, unless it is a genesis transaction. So this is the one exception. But apart from the genesis, there would need always to be more in the inputs of a certain token ID than there are in the outputs. So you can burn these tokens by simply not including them. And unlike Satoshis, which if you don't include them, they go to the miners, these cash tokens, if you don't include them, they just are burned. They don't exist anymore. So that's the fungible tokens. They have only this rule about inputs and outputs. And then there's also the NFTs, and they have a bit more specific rules about how you can transfer them. So a bit more specific consensus rules.
Yeah, but you replicate this origin transaction ID when you create the new outputs, right? This is
this transaction this token ID is replicated. So of course,
and
if
it's consensus enforced, right? So it's not like just a convention. This is enforced by the script VM.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we're having a conversation, me and a guy in the Bitcoin space called Adaman. We're having a conversation about how you could use opcat to build a similar token structure. Actually, now that you explained it, it actually would be quite similar, but using opcat to enforce a genesis, where the genesis creates all the tokens, then they can be distributed. Given that, I guess there's no, you can't transfer a token like that through an off-chain network like Lightning, because they live with UTXOs, and with Lightning, value is transferred outside of UTXOs. It essentially teleports from one UTXO to another. Is that accurate?
I think you could probably make it work on Lightning because, I think you could make it work, but the research hasn't been, not too much research has been done.
Imagine like consuming one of these token, some amount, and creating two outputs, but you are not sending it, to the miners. You are just keep signing state updates, and you are distributing the amounts between outputs. I think it would work exactly the same, kind of like Taproot assets also work somehow over Lightning.
Yeah, so we added native tokens, so tokens that are consensus enforced, but you could also have script enforced tokens. So what you need for script enforced tokens is what I mentioned, these detached proofs. You need to solve a recursion problem because you need it's kind of like a back to Genesis problem. So of course, if you have a transaction and you want to prove that you hold valid tokens, then these are only valid tokens if you if you got them from someone who had these valid tokens, and so you need to trace it all the way back to Genesis. So it's like kind of like recursion. You have the recursion base, so this is the Genesis, and then each is the recursion step. So once you can prove the recursion step is valid, then you can prove the whole recursion. And this way you could do script enforced tokens without having them like a native, like built into the consensus layer, because they would be script enforced. But for this, you need to detach the proof, because otherwise, because of the recursion, you would have growing sizes in the transaction. So you cannot fit all these proofs in one transaction. So you need to you need to detach them so they're not covered by the transaction hash, because otherwise, the recursion.
The interesting thing is Bitcoin is going in the direction right now. I mean, not intentionally. This is just something people do with it, really, and nobody can stop them from doing it. So these client-side validation protocols actually like completely remove these proofs that you are talking about from the blockchain, like altogether. These only exist on client side. They are verified out of bounds, and what happens is that you can actually violate the rules, but then nobody else will accept those tokens from you. So everyone will only accept tokens that do not violate these exogenous rules, and this seems to work pretty well. Like, even though it has nothing to do with Bitcoin consensus, people don't like to burn their own money if they understand that nobody else is interested in shenanigans, and everything is provable. And Bitcoin UTXOs only act as what Peter told, I believe, Christian, as one-time use seals. You can actually create these immutable state transitions where the validity is only checked exogenously, basically out of bound of the Bitcoin protocol, and somehow these protocols are making living their prime time on Bitcoin right now. It looks like so that's an interesting thing.
We went through a period of that type of token, and it was very painful. It was called the SLP protocol, and the killer that I don't know all the things that you can and can't do with Taproot and so forth, but one of the killer problems that you'll run into, or that we ran into, was the vending machine problem, where sure, if you put something up for sale, so to speak, like something that needs to be verified, let's just say for sale, if you put it for sale, you can always verify that, right? Because the buyer can just look and be like, yeah, that's real. But you can't buy. You can't put up a buy order, so to speak, or an equivalent where I want something and I need you to give that to me, but I can't verify it in script. And so therefore you're kind of cut off from half of the economy, the economic model. You can sell, but you can't buy
So this is
through a trusted setup.
This is what we saw with Ordinal. So there were Ordinal marketplaces where you could buy, because an Ordinal is just a UTXO. So you can enforce a script on your UTXO. So you can lock your Ordinal in a smart contract, essentially. But you cannot say, I want to buy this type of Ordinal in a smart contract. Because you can't validate the Ordinal with your contract, because it's just used as a data layer, the blockchain. All the validation happens off chain. So it's actually quite bad for things like AMM dexes. So if you want to build a Uniswap style dex on Bitcoin with BRC20, that will never be possible, because the the DEX cannot validate the tokens. So for this, you really need script enforced tokens or consensus validated tokens. So something like Ordinals or BRC20, they will never have AMM DEXs like Uniswap.
Yeah, and that's at least at this time in Bitcoin development, that's a stated goal of Bitcoin, is to not have AMMs and DEXs on chain.
A stated goal by whom? I'm not trying to argue. I literally, I just want to know what you mean by.
Yeah, so I mean, it depends exactly who you ask.
Yeah.
In the Bitcoin BTC developer community, and several of us, I would say I'm about half or maybe 70% included in that, are concerned that if we have AMMs or DEXs on chain, that they would create a significant increase in the available MEV that could be extracted by miners outside of the base transaction fee, kind of the normal transaction fee flow, and that they could then be in a situation where custom block building, as is done on Ethereum with paid block building services and kind of proprietary block building algorithms, could result in a higher extractable value for miners, which would be a centralizing influence on Bitcoin mining. So for that reason, a fair number of Bitcoin BTC developers are resistant to allowing the development of AMMs or DEXs.
I see. I wonder if they've actually gone through what a DEX looks like on a UTXO chain, because that obviously that's something we're extremely worried about as well, right? A lot of shared roots there, and not only MEV, because that's a lot of that is alleviated just due to the UTXO design, but there's also techniques you can use. If you look at the JetX exchange AMM design, it very explicitly handles parallelism and avoidance of contention, and making sure that there's a tick and so forth, so that there's no MEV happening in there. But yeah, a lot of it is alleviated just due to the good design of UTXO. But that's interesting. Thanks for explaining.
Yeah, and that's frankly an argument that I've been making, that I think that's why I'm like 70% of that camp, that I think some Bitcoin BTC developers are too concerned about this, because they view it as, if it's possible to build systems that leak significant MEV to the base layer miners, it will happen. And what you just said is what I've been saying, that proper design of those systems will prevent that leakage of MEV, because that's bad experience for the users of those systems. And so why would a developer of a DEX build a bad DEX? They try to build a good DEX.
And the obvious thing to add there is that if it is indeed a bad experience for the user and probably for the owner of the DEX, you're probably just going to see people work around it, which means not actually having the MEV, like for instance having some sort of centralized system, which is what people have been worried about. We're going to have for high-speed trading, and I've always said, well, that doesn't make any sense, because that's not going to be profitable. So people that really want it, they're just going to build something centralized that they can control, and therefore it's not a problem that we have to worry about.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing is that a lot of this is still sort of theoretical. I tend to also think that if you made a DEX which had significant MEV, like the MEV comes from somewhere. That's essentially the users paying the fees. So if somebody could have a better design, yeah, why wouldn't they just make a better design without MEV, offer lower fees, and all the users would switch? So it's hard for me to imagine a DEX getting significant traction with a significant amount of MEV inbuilt into it, and or it would easily be replaced by a competitor. But we don't know. No, you don't know anything until it's live in prod, really, and that's where it's somewhat of a shame that the BCH ecosystem isn't more advanced, because probably over the next year, maybe 18 months, I think we're going to see quite a bit more of that development happening. And so if this turns out to be a problem, well, I guess we'll be the canary in the coal.
All right, so I
that.
just need to ask this. I'm willing.
Okay, 18 months. Yeah, that I know that number.
Can somebody
No, none of that.
Can somebody actually explain what MEV is? Minor extracted value. Just for everyone in the room like myself, sorry, who doesn't actually understand what that means and what the implications are. Because I feel like it's kind of thrown around like a boogeyman.
Okay. I can give it a shot to explain it very succinctly. Basically, it's the revenue that is not expressed in explicit fees that the miner can extract by ordering transactions specifically. So basically, by ordering transactions in a certain way, or maybe inserting his own transactions, which is, I think, known as sandwiching, which is allowed by certain type of recursive covenants, maybe, and of course on chains that are not UTXO chains but account based, it's naturally happening. So that is one example of this thing where the miner can basically just front run everyone and extract value, because what happens is people are making bets real time, and then the time moves on, a block is still not found, but the price has moved maybe significantly. Let's say Bitcoin crashes by 10% or something else that Bitcoin is traded against crashes by 10%. And that creates this opportunity that rewriting the future, so to speak, is extremely profitable, especially with, maybe leverage or something. So everything that the miner can do by ordering transactions and selecting them to the block specifically, that creates him revenue, allows him to get revenue that is not expressed explicitly in fees, that is MEV.
Yeah, so I want to build further on that. So the ordering is more of an Ethereum EVM specific issue, because their miners or block producers can order transactions any way they want. In Bitcoin, that's not really true, especially in Bitcoin Cash with CTOR. It's we have a fixed ordering for transactions. So yeah, miners can't choose the ordering; they simply can't. But what they can do is they can pick and choose, right? That's the privilege miners have. So for example, if there's a lot of trading happening on a DEX and the price moves, they can ignore or kind of censor those transactions and say, oh, that's handy for me, because then I can trade at the price of 10 minutes or maybe up to 1 hour ago. So I can use the old price, and I can only process my own order where I buy up a tons of tokens or a ton of Bitcoin Cash for a cheap price. So then by running extra software, so the miner would monitor these DEXs or monitor these extra protocols. And because they have the privilege of selecting which transactions go in a block, they can add their own. And this way they could, earn more money. Yeah. And this way this could become a centralization risk.
What was it that prevents ordering on BCH?
It is a UTXO chain, so you cannot change the order. No, I don't think these are related. I'm sorry. Instead of ordering, think of sequencing transactions, if you like, because the order within a block is not really what matters. It's not what the miners gain revenue from it. It's the order, changing the order of events as they come after each other. So, like, you can use
the order in the block can matter, because if you're doing an on-chain DEX or AMM, which transactions get access to a given price depends on the order of transactions within the block itself.
Yes, but that only applies if you can actually do the sandwiching. If somehow.
So what is it this called that prevents that from happening in BCH?
Yeah, no.
It's called CTOR, Canonical Transaction Ordering. It was added, I think it was in early 2018, or maybe it was in late 2018. It was part of the controversy that led to the BSV people splitting off because they thought it was, I don't know, against the gospel of Craig Wright or whatever.
It's a red herring. Guys, I'm sorry, it's a red herring. Like, the miner decides what goes into the block. Like, let's skip this.
Yeah, what's important is that there's unconfirmed transaction chains. So a miner can, if they don't want to do one block reorg, they only have things to say about the unconfirmed transaction chain. So they can include half the unconfirmed transaction chain and then add their own transaction, or they can add nothing of the unconfirmed transaction chain, or they can add the whole transaction chain. But notice that they can't break the chain, right? Because these are separate transactions. So you can't say, if it's a chain of 10 transactions within a span of one block, you can't say I only include the last too, because those depend because of UTXO, though they depend on all the previous transactions. So it's different in this respect to EVM, and indeed the ordering within the block is less relevant. It's really these unconfirmed chains that where you need to look at.
Right.
So basically, UTXO chains are different from account-based systems.
Yes, the main thing that is different, this is relevant here, is that any transaction spending on Bitcoin or Bitcoin Cash always refers to the previous transaction by its transaction ID. Therefore, you can't just put something in the middle, because that transaction ID, that basically is your UTXO, is either already spent or not. And so it is a chain that is unbreakable.
I don't think that's true once you have introspection, though, because you can have, or once you have check data sig, because you can have a signature that asserts something about the transaction that does not include the UTXO, and then that transaction can be rewritten by the miner to have to refer to a different UTXO earlier in the chain, as long as it satisfies the other predicates of the script.
That is not possible without the original UTXO signer re-signing the rewritten transaction.
Well, that's only if you have if you check sig operation. If you use check data sig, what's signed could be some other parts of the transaction, not a standard transaction hash that includes the previous transaction output.
Yeah, right. So people can log their UTXOs in contracts that say I can be inserted at any point in the chain. But but why would users do this? Yeah, maybe it's something they could do in the future, but this is not something we see yet. So, but yeah, technically it's possible to first enter a smart contract that could. It's a covenant, so anybody can interact with this, and the covenant just has like a minimum price and a maximum price. So yeah, I see what you're saying.
Yeah. And that's just, I mentioned that because that's something that's being concretely built for Bitcoin BTC right now. Like one of the things specifically that is intended with the adding of more expressive covenants to BTC is rebindable channels for the Lightning Network, which is exactly that. These are channel transactions that can be ordered differently and can have different UTXOs as their input.
Yes. So since Postos couldn't make it, looks like I can also try to channel him a little bit on this discussion about MEV and the miners and these games if you guys like, but we can also skip it. Up to you.
I mean, I really appreciate the explanation. Thank you guys for kind of doing that dive on it, and hopefully somebody in the audience got value out of that too, because I had always had a feeling that it was more of an Ethereum problem, and I do hear this argument, about okay, what if you had a covenant that effectively you could do this sandwich template? But I think it's really important to note that is only on the level of that contract. It wouldn't be a protocol level issue.
I mean, the thing with MEV, the real scary boogeyman that makes people scared of it is actually the so-called vertical integration problem, where it causes massive miner centralization because larger actors, larger pools with more infrastructure can extract more MEV with more sophisticated methods and can even maybe create it. And it takes disproportionately more resources, but you can't really compete with them by just simply running a Bitcoin Core node at a remote location. So that's kind of the usual, the usual objection against allowing any MEV-like games on Bitcoin to become significant revenue for miners, because people really are afraid of that. Like a 60% cartel will naturally form to extract the maximum possible value, and once this becomes like an established fact of life, they can start throwing their weight around in protocol governance or censorship or become like the organization that, let's say, nation states negotiate with and whatnot, and nobody who is like a Bitcoiner wants to even think about such a future, I believe. So that's kind of the explanation why nobody likes these things. Basically, the template generation, the idea in Bitcoin is that the template generation should be as simple and easiest to just run the standard implementation and just ask for a block template. And that should give you very close to the maximum extractable value from the mempool. However, MEV stuff completely changes this potentially. So you have to understand that it might actually be magnitudes more that you can extract in as MEV if you are sophisticated enough from a multi-layered protocol. And that's kind of scary, because if it's not equally open to everyone, then those that can extract it will have first dibs on the best ASICs and will be able to grow faster, and they will inevitably become like the majority player.
Floppy, you've had your hand up for a minute if you wanted to get in here.
So I have a few questions. First is, can someone summarize all the changes that have been done at protocol level in Bitcoin Cash since 2017 that makes it different compared to Bitcoin? Second is, what all privacy options do you have for users on Bitcoin Cash apart from CoinJoin? And since Bitcoin Cash already has a lot of covenant opcodes that makes it possible to implement covenants. So, what are the use cases that are really popular, or what are the people using these covenants for? Is anyone using op check data sig for anything, and what are those use cases?
To your first question, I added to the nest a great post that BCH Austist made that summarized all those changes, so you can check it out there. And I don't have an answer for the second.
Emergent, do you want to take those questions once Rooted makes his little post?
Sure. Yeah, I was just looking at the great document that Mini Satoshi has made recently. This great one. It's quite long though, so like to go through all the changes, but I could do that. For privacy, there is of course Cash Fusion, which is very worth looking into. You can just go to there's a public site, cashfusion.org, that talks
He
about
did
the
say other
protocol.
than CoinJoin.
Oh, okay. Other than CoinJoin. Yeah, I think you've been thinking about that one more recently, so I won't cover that one. And then the last one was about what check data sig stuff is being used. Is that right, Floppy?
Yeah. What are people using our covenants for?
All kinds of things. So we General Protocols is doing the protocol called AnyHedge, which is basically a futures. It's actually forward contracts, but some kind of derivative type things. So that's been in action since 2018, 2019, but only in the last 2 years has it come into real production, and it's going very well. There's some other systems using cash tokens to as an AMM, right? So you can set up an AMM where you can sell tokens, for the typical like meme token type thing, or if you had shares or whatever. So you can just do AMMs, right? That's a very big deal. As Matthew says, there's the what did you call it, Matthew? It's like the from 0 to 1. Like it's a huge step to go to AMM. Like you have to be able to show that you can do an AMM. It's such a valuable thing to be able to do. Yeah. What else is going on with check data sig? Lots of different things.
I mean, there's the prediction market thing for
the prediction market.
Yeah, so I posted a few links in the comments. So first of all, the fork map. So that's the easiest to see all the changes of all the different Bitcoin networks. So yeah, there you also have the timestamp and like the dates of activation of each of the Bitcoin Cash network upgrades. And then I also posted the link to a site I maintain. It's tokenauts.cash, and it's links to the dApps page. So these are the different smart contract apps. And indeed, there's currently 20-something smart contract apps on BCH. And this includes prediction, like a prediction platform, BCH Bull, then, which is futures or derivatives platform, then NFT mints, DEXs, a crowdfunding platform, things like that. So I would say if you want a comprehensive list, that's a good place to look. And then there's a few also plugins, which I did not include all in the list, like an inheritance contract. Like should you not refresh the contract for a year, for example, it assumes you died, and the inheritance procedure can go into effect. And there is also a Mecenas contract, which is kind of like a Patreon on chain, where you say, I want to donate this amount of BCH, and you put it in a recurring contract so that you have a kind of like an income stream. So yeah, these recurring payment applications are also very interesting. So yeah, that are all the different applications. But I would say, yeah, definitely if you take a look at the DeFi section, so the total value locked, it's really any hedge. So the protocol by Emergent, by John is blowing everything else out of the water. So you can really see that financial applications and derivatives currently are the main, like the biggest use case. And they have also just demonstrated that it's possible to build a profitable business on smart contracts with Bitcoin Cash.
And the
one thing that
crowdfunding
we
that you
haven't-
mentioned is very cool. So it may not be the biggest yet, but the crowdfunding has been super instrumental. And the previous one was not smart contracts, the one that has been used a lot in BCH. But we have new up and coming ones, such as this one that I just used today called fundme.cash. And this is actually using, on-chain, fully on-chain contract setups for crowdfunding. And crowdfunding is incredibly important. For some of those reasons that you guys mentioned about avoiding centralization, not just miners, but any kind of centralization.
Yeah, one thing that we haven't seen yet, but which I'm hoping we will see, is now that we have the cash token stuff, and I think nobody's just got around to it yet, but famously, obviously, Tornado was operating great on Ethereum so much that they ran into trouble with law enforcement. And I'm sure with cash tokens, if you were brave enough, somebody could make a version of that on BCH, which would also be a sort of alternative privacy system where you send in your coins, you get a receipt back, and then you redeem your receipt at a later date for some different coins, like at your own sort of leisure, right? So there's got to be some kind of design like that, which somebody will do at some point, but nobody's done it yet.
And I think that's probably going to get easier now, right? With the upcoming, or likely to get easier with the upcoming potential changes going through the chip process, such as the very big integers, and then improved script limits and so forth, better math, because then we start to get into the territory of doing cryptographic operations, maybe having specialized opcodes for doing ZK or whatever. Like, who knows where we'll go eventually. But as things open up, it's going to be easier to think about those kind of protocols.
So have you given any thought about doing something similar to what Taproot accomplishes, where basically you can have many alternative script leaves and also maybe key spend alternatives? And I'm not saying you have to do the exact same thing, but having the ability to lock in some Merkle root of possible spend scripts and then just reveal the pod that you actually want to use might actually be possibly beneficial. Has that came up in BCH?
Yeah, we've had some designs for it. There's a presentation from 2018 that was done in Townsville, Australia. They call it Bitcoin Cash City. And there was a presentation about doing something like Mast, similar things, Schnorr, with BCH. I think it's more of just nobody needs it, because to some degree, some of those things are really workarounds for not being able to have a check data sig or check stack signature from stack or whatever it is, the name for the one that you guys are proposing. So to some degree, they're workarounds, so there's just not been a need for it. But yeah, it's possible, and there are some interesting applications for it.
I don't think it. Can you explain how it would be a workaround on having check data sig? I mean, because it's check data sig lets you delegate to a different key or to.
It means for the discrete lock contracts, they use it as a workaround. So I think I agree. Yeah, BTC activated things in a funny order because Mast is really an optimization when you have very big and many scripts, but now they need to use like the leaves of the mastery. They need to use it for in a very hacky way for BitVM and things like that. So it's because they're missing all the other primitives. At least if you want to develop complex things, you need to use what you have, right? So.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think they're just to be fair to the BCC side, there's a reason why it went this way, and that was that because BTC refuses to do hard forks, there are certain things we couldn't do on the existing script system, and part of what Taproot did was open up essentially a new script system that had greater upgradability, so we could then start doing things without hard forking within the TapScript Taproot world.
Yeah, that's definitely a fair point. But for Bitcoin Cash, which does have hard forks, currently contract authors are not really asking for this. Also, because you can label your different contracts. For example, if you have 10 spending paths, you can label them with a unique NFT data. So you give them all the same token ID, and you start numbering them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 up till 10. And then you can just you essentially have 10 code paths that your contract can interact with. And you just need to add one of the 10 inputs and verify that it has a token ID and a one number and the NFT data. And then you also you don't have exactly the same as Mast, but you can only attach part of your.
So you would lock your let's say your main BCH funds. You would lock with a contract that requires an input from a specific cash token. And then that's how you would control. Okay, yeah, cool.
Yeah, so what I'm currently working on is an app that uses this. So you have like a one very simple covenant, and it just attaches to another input. Let's say this is at input index 0, but then you check at input index 1 that there is a specific token ID and that this has the NFT data 1 to 10. So it's one of those 10 operations, and then it needs to attach one of those functions, and those actually enforce the logic of the contract. So you spread it out over how many number of inputs you want.
Yeah. So BCH Autist mentioned in the comments that you can actually do something very similar to Must right now with a technique called sidecar. If I understand, you can, with introspection, you can reveal the script you want to enforce.
Yeah, we're talking about the same thing. Yeah, it's similar to what he calls it a sidecar. So I call it like NFT contract functions, but it's the same thing. You just add an input at index 1, and this is like they travel together kind of.
Nice.
So there's also on the privacy front. Oh, sorry. I was going to say on the privacy front, there's also the reusable payment addresses, which is kind of a variation on stealth addresses. You guys might already be familiar with those, but it's one that's done where you don't have to publish any on-chain identifiers or anything like that. So you have a much larger anonymity set. So there's sorry, I had forgotten that one. Someone mentioned in a chat.
Silent payments, I think, is also the more closer analog to that than I believe.
Bitcoin yeah. There's several kind of variations on doing payments where I can make the payment. And the main point of this one is you have a single address that people can send to, and when they send it to you, they're sending really to a private HD chain between the two of you that's generated in some fashion through. I won't go into the details because I couldn't explain them well anyway. But anyway, you have a single address, and people are able to send to that address without actually sending directly to that address. And so you can just publish one address without having to continuously publish new addresses.
Nice. So the question about what BCH activated so far, again, BCH Autist posted a pretty comprehensive list. Do we want to go over it maybe for the sake of the audience and people, or just move on?
I don't know that that's going to be super valuable. Like anybody can read that list. I think it's more interesting to talk about what people are doing as opposed to all of the consensus differences between the networks.
I would agree with that. All right, so so we've been talking for about an hour and a half, and I feel like it's been a pretty good conversation so far. And so I am wondering if you guys are open to kind of talking about where we were earlier. We had some I guess questions like we wanted to contrast the I guess way to get stuff implemented, and not so much versus on the hard fork versus soft fork, but Reardon, I guess to everything that you were saying at the beginning of the space, like how close do you think you would be to getting anything, I guess, like actually merged in, or I see like even on your full name there, it says like embrace forks. And so when I was talking about Bitcoin metagame, this is kind of what I'm talking about. And I know earlier, was it this year, like sometime last year, there were some murmurs here and there with all of the ordinal stuff that um, some people, I guess, especially in like the sandwich camp, were kind of thinking, well, maybe we actually should consider just writing up our own client or forking. Or I think maybe I even heard Udi saying something along those lines too. And so I'm kind of wondering, from your guys' perspective, if that's kind of the direction you feel like the community is going in right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of different things going on the Bitcoin BTC kind of how the future is going to look. One thing that Udi has said that I think is very true is that the next soft fork will not look like previous soft forks on Bitcoin, and I think that's something that's part of what my handle is, embrace forks. I think people have gotten a very fixed view that the way we do soft forks is that we get code merged into core and then we propose an activation process for that. And then, as though that's the only way that Bitcoin can possibly move forward. And that's obviously false. As you said, there's like a meta game in Bitcoin here. And I keep trying to remind folks in the BTC space that if I were to start locking funds with opcat as part of my script tomorrow, opcat is essentially active. As you said, I'm running it on my node. I'm enforcing that. I've activated opcat on my node. And the fact is that, yes, most of the network would let people steal that from me. But now it's a game theory. If I can convince a lot of people to do that, and it would create a great risk of destabilization to the network if those funds started getting stolen against the will of the runners of those nodes, that incentivizes other people to start running an opcat enforcing client as well. And it's a totally personal choice what client you run, what version of consensus that client enforces. And I don't understand why the many in the BTC camp have such a fixed view, as though Bitcoin is this monolith that moves forward by some kind of fixed process. No, it's anarchy, literally anarchy. So that's my thoughts on it.
Yes.
Let's
burn down the B process, guys. Let's burn down the B process to the ground. BIP 2 was a mistake. BIP 1 was a mistake as well. But yeah, just forget that shit. People should run the code that they want to run. They should run the code that opens up the future they want to see. And fuck the BIP process and the gatekeepers.
I think there's so much nuance in this because it's a game theory question. It's completely a social phenomenon, and so I think for lack of a better word, my role in the Bitcoin ecosystem, and part of the reason I'm even here talking to the Bitcoin Cash people, is that I'm someone who looks at things somewhat more objectively. And what I want to try and build is consensus through the social means of talking to people and building understanding. And so what I would say is that it doesn't, to Moonshot's point, it actually doesn't matter whether we use the BIP process or whether we just start pushing code and getting people to run it, or whether I start locking 10 Bitcoin that I don't have in an opcat script. What matters is the social aspect and talking to people and building actual social consensus. And then once we have social consensus, you can activate it by just saying, hey, everyone, here's the code. Or you can activate it by using minor signaling, or you can activate it adversarially. It doesn't matter at that point once you have social consensus.
Yeah,
it's really interesting. I've not heard of this idea floated before. This is definitely an interesting one, that you could somehow like lock. I imagine you'd sort of time delay it, right? So you're like, we're going to lock our coins into an anyone can spend contract, but in a year's time, on the 31st of July, and have as many people as possible who really wanted to do a fork put it all in there, and if the fork went through, they could get their money back using the new opcode. But if it didn't, then they would just get basically rugged and all their money taken, and then you're kind of betting against yourself. So you're sort of setting a grenade that's going to blow up in your own face, because you're kind of incentivizing people not to do the upgrade, especially the miners, because they can just grab the money.
It's a very bad game. That's a very bad game. No.
Yeah, exactly.
You guys I mean, this sounds a lot like what was going on.
Option there, it's a further split.
It sounds a lot like what was going on in 2015, 2016, 2017. I mean, we've been down this road before. A bunch of clients, people were trying to run different code. Like there was a lot of disagreement about the direction, about the block size stuff. It sounds like, history's sort of repeating itself to some degree now, where people are incentivized to want to run their own software, their own nodes. I mean, we've been down this road. Core has like a lot of resources to shoot down anything, but we've seen this before. I mean, you guys are familiar with this, right? Or no?
Yeah. So what I wanted to add is it's very weird, because the way I see it is there are obviously emerging patterns where certain people with a lot of social clout, lot of social credit, let's say, can basically derail any discussion with basically just offhand FUD posts on Twitter, and can arouse a lynch mob against anyone proposing any change, and it's a very easy task for them to do. That's how I see this problem. And so long that people pay attention to these individuals, they basically have veto powers over the changes on Bitcoin. And some of them actually, like you all know, have businesses that may or may not depend on the status quo being upheld, and nothing really changing, and Bitcoin barreling down on this bank-to-bank custodial bullshit future of trying to recreate the gold standard and hoping for a different outcome this time for whatever magical thinking reasons. I don't know. What I wanted to say about the Great Script Restoration project is again, this is a very, very similar pattern where someone wants to make like a tiny, very easy to understand change to the protocol, and then people start coming in with ideas how to blow up the scope and make it harder to reason about, and harder to account for all the possible outcomes, and just increasing the scope and just outbidding on functionality until they get everyone exciting on something that is basically a giga project, and nothing will ever come out of it. But for sure, it is 5 or 10 years down the road before we can even start discussing activation. And in 5 or 10 years, it will be, with every year passing, increasingly more difficult to reach any sort of consensus. So that's kind of how I see this thing from the other.
Yeah, so
I highly recommend you look at the chip process, and because we've learned from this, right? We, as Callan was saying, from the BCH perspective, right? Like, obviously, this is from BCH perspective. We've been through this, and we went through the fire. We felt the pain, and we learned from it. And as Reardon said, it's a social problem. It's a social layer issue, and it's not a technical issue. And you guys should really look at the chip process, because we've been through now, 4 years of four more years of just clean upgrades, low contention, stability, all of those things that you're talking about, Moonsettler, are social issues, and they can be, they're solvable, but yeah, there's a lot of pain in incoming for anybody who expects Core to do something different.
They're not going to change anything, man. Like, they capture the Bitcoin is Bitcoin.
No, let's be constructive. Let's be constructive, right? Like we're trying to aim for a positive future, right? So let's be constructive.
Yeah, but the future is to abandon the abuser, man. You don't stay in an abusive situation with an abusive.
So
this gets to what Moonsettler was saying.
Callan, wrap it up, man.
All right. We're really trying not to steer in that direction, Callan. I know you're coming in late, but we specifically wanted to avoid going here. So we're just going to back this up. Yes, the block says were happened. Obviously, like I said, that's the elephant in the room. We addressed that 2 weeks ago. And it's really up to, Everybody, like I said at the very beginning of the space, it's the Bitcoin metagame, and we're acknowledging this. You are going to run the code that is most valuable to you. So no matter what happened in the past, we are all supporting the network that makes the most sense to us in this present moment. And whether minds can be changed one way or another is totally irrelevant because people are going to come to their own conclusions. In fact, the reason that the BTC developers that are on stage with us now are here is because they have come to their own conclusions. And whether or not they agree with our conclusions is completely irrelevant in this case because they're still doing something they're very passionate about. And yeah, nobody from Blockstream is here, right? Blockstream is not in the room with us right now. I went and talked to Blockstream myself in Nashville just a couple weeks ago. Okay, like most of those people that we considered ops back then don't even work for the company anymore, except for Adam. So like, we don't need to revisit the past, guys. It just we're going to move forward. We're here to talk about Bitcoin tech, not about Blockstream or anything that happened back then. If we're going to revisit history, I'd really like to keep it to like, the year 2020 forward. On that note, it is really good to know Emergent talking about the chip process here. I think is a really good model for governance that could work for BTC as well. It's kind of funny. Yeah, Bitcoin is definitely anarchy. Fuck the bit process, all that. I fully agree with that because, again, that's the metagame. Run the code. If Reardon's already running an OpCat client, he is playing the game of the Bitcoin metagame. And if he can convince other people, then maybe you'll have an OpCat enabled BTC, right? But that's our right to free speech right there, is run the code you want to run. So I just wanted to give everyone a minute to just think about that for a second. We don't need to go into the past with it. And unpause. Go ahead.
Sorry, I set everyone off. Sorry.
It's okay. No worries.
I want to say that I think is really, really important, and it's part of, I think, as Kallisti was just saying, like the essence of this space is, you may disagree with Rusty's approach in bringing the script restoration forward, and that's fine. But to question his motives in doing it, I think, is very unproductive. Rusty, I think, is a very well-known, long-standing figure in open source. He's been contributing to Linux kernel, Bitcoin, and Lightning for 3 decades now. And so to question his motives in bringing that forward as though this is going to be the Giga project, he's doing it on purpose to delay changes to Bitcoin, I think is just purely unproductive. I can agree with you, and I said this to him directly to his face when I was interacting with him in Austin, that I think doing this stepwise is a better approach, and that's fine. But I don't think it's productive to question his motives.
Yeah, it's funny that you frame it that way, because nobody here would question his motives, because we are pretty much aligned with his great script restoration. I would even frame it the way, like, if next year we get, if we get the VM limits and the big int, then our script restoration has been completed. And you're right, you have to plan it out over years, so that you cannot activate it like just in 6 months. But then it's of course easy for us to say, yeah, we have been doing exactly that, right? Since 2018, we started with the easy stuff, reactivating the opcodes, which are like opcat, and then we kept on building at a steady pace. So for us, like for me, this is kind of reassuring that you say it's a multi-year project. We should start sooner rather than later. And my take would be, yeah, we kind of did start a great script restoration in 2018, and now we're completing it like next year, hopefully.
Yeah, I'm just going by basically what I have been observing over the years. Like, there are certain patterns emerging repeatedly. Each and every time consensus is trying to form around something that is doable in this really fucked up situation that Bitcoin is in. Like, it's very much an adversarial thinking lot going on, basically, and everyone is trying to destroy Bitcoin, and everyone is the enemy that proposes any change to Bitcoin, and they so the situation is pretty psychotic.
Have you noticed that I don't get that reaction when I propose changes to Bitcoin for the most part? Right. So I think there's a problem in Bitcoin, and that there's a lot of social scar tissue. And that's a genuine, significant problem for BTC. There's social scar tissue. And you are expressing that social scar tissue right now when you talk about the history and, oh, no one can do anything. Everyone gets attacked for trying to do anything. That's your scar tissue. And similarly, when Harding and Blue Matt respond to me saying, maybe consensus doesn't need to work this way, they start kind of getting a little panicky and responding in a pretty panicked way. Or the worst in that case is Michael Folkson. this is all social scar tissue that we have in the Bitcoin ecosystem, and frankly, you know, some of the other folks in the Bitcoin Cash side also, and I have my own too. I said it out loud, like me coming to this space is I have to kind of get over the scars of war from the Bitcoin block size wars. And the only way that we are going to be able to make consensus changes to Bitcoin going forward is that enough of us put aside our scar tissue and are able to build consensus.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, you are 100% correct that this is basically like reliving and delving into post-trauma partly, and just going like tinfoil hat paranoid, and indulging our own conspiracy theories maybe too much. I realize that on a conscious level, but somehow my brain always comes there when these patterns pop up again and again and again over the years. It's really hard not to. Like I try not to, but after a while I just fucking lose it. But I don't want to dwell on this too much. I just wanted to make sure that I actually did and do view it with suspicion when people blow up the scope from something manageable and easily doable within a year or two to something that is a multi-year project in Bitcoin. I do question their motives because, as you said, taking an incremental step-by-step approach is very easy, absolutely doable, and it does not actually hinder anything. And we could be doing that. But again, that aside, the meta game that we have been discussing, I have an interesting addition to that maybe, is what do you guys think how it would play out if BCH became much more successful in MEV inducing games with open, open sequencers, or I don't know how people call it these nowadays. And basically BCH miners were able to gain more fee revenue proportionally compared to the valuations for a period from BCH, and the hash maybe started to move over. How does that play out? What do you think?
I think it would probably be more productive not to get into that discussion, but I did want to respond to something that you said. Obviously, I'm not developing on BTC, but the thing about small scopes and large scopes, there's a trade-off there, right? It's not that large scopes are always bad, right? Because in some ways, if you do small incremental changes, the risk of those is that you go down a blind alley unwittingly. That you go down an alley where you've done a change and then you can't undo it. You unless you're going to get into hard forks, you can't undo it, and even then you probably can't undo it. But with larger scopes, one of the things that you can do is scope out significant changes, and that's what happened with the introspection and integers and so forth, and now with the VM limits. You have to think holistically at some level about what are all the issues, and are we going to cut ourselves off from one avenue of evolution by doing some incremental changes that don't fit with the big picture and so forth. So there's a balance there, and I think what we've landed on just through our history, not necessarily with some kind of grand plan, is looking at things, the big picture, and kind of planning out large scale changes and then taking pieces of them and implementing them to some degree. Do you think that's a fair description, Mathieu?
Yeah, I think we experimented a bit. In the beginning, we had like a 6 months schedule, and it turned out that was kind of too fast, and things didn't like totally fit together. For example, we had I think Schnorr for multisig was prioritized at some point, and at some other point there was up reverse bytes. So things in hindsight that were not really impactful at all, but did create more work for everyone. And then we moved to a 1 year schedule, and I think with ABLA and cash tokens, this allowed for like a larger, and also with the native introspection. So this gave more time and allowed also for us to actually say there's a lock-in date in November, and then only the change activates in May. So this gives plenty of time for developers to start building applications, for people to other node teams to still do the implementation in their nodes. So I think this change in our planning and in hard forks was really good. And of course, it came together with the chip process. So yeah, I think we evolved in that respect.
Yeah,
and also those changes like cash tokens didn't happen in 1 year. Those took like 2-3 years, and even some of the predecessors of that were even longer, like back into the years before BTC and BCH split. So yeah, some of these big changes have been under 3, 4, 5 years of consideration. So yeah, it can take a long time to do significant changes. So anyway, my main point was big changes doesn't always necessarily mean it's a bad thing. That was the main point I wanted to make.
Absolutely agree with you guys, but consider something, please. Bitcoin is in a state where 12 lines of fucking code, opcat, is going to be discussed for 3 or 4 years before activation talks even begin, if they ever begin. That is the state of Bitcoin. Fucking 12 lines of code, just concatenating 2 strings together, is discussed for 4 years. What the fuck are we gonna do with a giga project like Great Script Restoration? I have no idea. Like,
you know as well as I do that the number of lines of code is almost irrelevant to the discussion of the activation. And I think the Bitcoin Cash folks will say the same, that while the size of code can potentially have some impact and more code review needed, the implications to the network are because they could increase their scripts size limit to infinite, and that would break their system. But that's a one-line change. Like the size of the code change is not something we should be considering here.
Yeah, but the simplicity of the change, I mean, the net simplicity of the change to the system, as you said, the implications can be many magnitudes larger than the code change. So this might probably come up with any significant ambitious code change as well, and will make it probably very, very, very contentious. That's kind of my feeling and my prediction based on observing this thing the past few years, how the social dynamics are moving around development. So I don't know, but
to Emergent real quick. I was trying to. I think that it's very. I love what you said, frankly, about a long-term project picking off pieces of it. And that's actually one of the things I've said since the BTC++ in Austin when I was talking to Rusty, is that the great thing about the script restoration as a project is that it gives us exactly that. It gives us, here's where we can get to as a Bitcoin BTC script system. And then one of the things, like, for example, I had an opcode I proposed called op internal key, which isn't really necessary if we go towards the script restoration. So I've pretty much dropped that from my kind of focus because we now have a long-term destination. So rather than doing side quests that aren't useful, we can focus.
Right.
I think
yeah.
Sorry, I think it's really valuable, again, to I want to just talk about the chip process again for a second, because a lot of what I'm hearing as far as the frustrations of development on BTC, and also kind of considering that we can all just run our own code, right? But what chip does is it gives you a framework to work with that sets expectations for how much thought you want to be putting into each respective change. It helps you really make sure you hit every corner of the scope when we're considering these changes. So something like opcat, I mean, I agree with Moonsettler, should not take 4 full years of discussion, considering that, over on our side, especially with far fewer resources, we managed to do cash tokens in a comparable amount of time, which is...
to be clear, the cat BIP was only posted 1 year ago today. So Moonsettler is predicting the future here. The BIP was only posted 1 year ago.
Oh, okay. I guess CTV might be a better example. I think Jeremy Rubin was working on that since 2019.
Yes, CTV has been around for 4 or 5 years.
So I guess that's a little more comparable, but I mean, I think also, setting that framework is important, is the important takeaway there.
Yeah, and it's not a new idea to reactivate opcat, right? So the 12 lines of codes are more of a detail than anything. So the idea that opcat could be reactivated was surely long before the 1 year official date that you mentioned.
I'm pretty sure it has been in the back of the mind of developers for a long time. Oh, I so wish we had opcat and we could do this or that. But the point and it's very good that you brought up CTV, because everyone knows that the implications for CTV, how how much it can change the kind of things that are discussed with OPCAT are extremely limited, literally incomparable to OPCAT, let's say. And it has been discussed for like 3 or 4 years already. So that's kind of why I projected that it is going to take at least as much for OPCAT, if not more, and it is probably a more contentious proposal. Even though it has more enthusiastic support, it also have more teeth grinding opposition, or I don't know how to express this. So people are much more riled up about OPCAT than about CTV probably right now. So this is the kind of situation we are in, and I really don't like people saying that instead of taking this incremental approach and step by step building out, let's say the great script restoration future for Bitcoin script, where we have the best possible script that we might want for Bitcoin. Instead of incremental approach, people are saying let's just work on this. There is no rush. Let's work on this for 5 more years. Let's really think about it. And like I said, years go by, and with the size of the project, sort of with the size of adoption, consensus is going to get a lot harder. So when you are saying that Bitcoin Cash managed to activate much more complicated changes without much controversy and opposition much sooner, I think that's kind of self-evident. So
I think for Bitcoin, instead of because there's many proposals for the script changes now maybe it's good to also focus on some of the stuff that can be done permissionlessly, like ARC and Burlup proposals, or like BitVM, and I saw the BitVM V2 working paper just dropped yesterday. So there is also, because there is a whole design space of new layer 2s, there will definitely be more stalling, I think, in the script innovation part. And it's also, it's not a clear process that any of these BIPs go through. So maybe one possible idea could be to have kind of poly market, prediction markets on will CAT be activated in 2025, 2026. Maybe that could be one way to measure like the probabilities of different proposals. Because right now, even for the most involved technical people, it's very hard to gauge like community sentiment, or like how far these proposals are along. So I would love to check each week what the percentages of OPCAT activation are, but maybe that's just me.
Yeah, I love that idea. I've been pushing something kind of similar in circles within the Bitcoin BTC developer community. Of we do need kind of a better way to measure consensus, both frankly developer consensus and user consensus. Because people on the one hand, I think it's to me very clear that OpCTV has developer rough consensus, but then I talk to certain people within the Bitcoin development ecosystem, and they're like, no, it doesn't. So it's something we need to work on. I got to run. This has been a great conversation. Happy to do it again sometime in the future.
Thanks for coming, Reardon. Really appreciate it.
Nice to talk with you.
Yeah, I love it.
Nice to meet you first time. Yeah, take care, man.
Yeah,
great to meet you guys. Yeah.
Now, I actually want to pose a question to everybody in the room, BCH and BTC, because I think it's kind of a hard question, and it's something that I think all of us should probably have on our radar, right? So a lot of people say that off-chain governance doesn't work. And of course, in BCH with our chip process, we're aiming to prove that wrong. But I think, if I was to kind of steelman that a little bit, or maybe play devil's advocate, maybe we're able to get some of these changes through because of our agility, because we're kind of the underdog, right? We're smaller. We have a smaller, quote unquote, core team of developers, and we're decentralized. We're not like colluding or anything, but let's just say Bitcoin Cash node goes adversarial for some reason, right? How do we cope with that? In the same way that what if Bitcoin Core is adversarial, right? And we do have multiple node implementations, but sometimes those node implementations fall out of date. We could look at, say, Flowy the Hub and BCHD. Both don't support cash tokens. So what do we do in that scenario? I think is something that's worth thinking about. And as far as keeping that conversation productive, while we can learn from history, I think it's also important to look at who are the players now that you need to convince in order to run your code, or who are the players now that you need to convince in order to signal that there is consensus? Is it the hordes of laser eye plebs, or is it people like, say, the people that we invited to be on stage today? I think those are all really hard questions that both sides need to think about really hard.
Yeah, I can only say that the social consensus in social media simply doesn't work. It's very easy to create the appearance of non-consensus, a small and vocal minority, and it's absolutely not severe resistant as well. So there is no severe resistance in these social protocols in this setting especially. And it's very, very easy to create the appearance of non-consensus. So if you say that we will only change the code if there is like a broad consensus, or everyone seems to be okay with it largely, it's very easy to sabotage that intentionally or even non-intentionally. Like I don't rule out that this phenomenon is not malicious. It's just a natural phenomenon that occurs in Bitcoin. That doesn't really change the end result. Like it doesn't really matter if it's organized and done out of malice, or if it's happening by accident to us. The end result is exactly the same. Bitcoin not getting the meaningful developments while it could have them is going to harm everyone in the end. So that's what I wanted to say. That I don't believe the idea of consensus in the way people talk about it is like a same goal at this point.
I like this idea of trying to sort of formalize or quantify, or just the mathematical part of my brain that always really speaks to it. And of course, the chip process doesn't have anything like that. But I talked about at Bliss ways that we could look into, and I haven't had the time to get around to it, but it's sort of similar to, like Matthew was saying about prediction markets would be one way to do it, but we could have a kind of pseudo on-chain governance approach if you had people minting NFTs, which they either backed up by locking up large amounts of BCH, or they could do it by associating it with their existing reputation on various, community platforms, and then being able to indicate on chain, like with your cash token, which proposals you were in favor of or against, or at what stage you felt they were like, and then we could have a sort of ongoing organic community hive mind figuring out what proposals were where, which you could see updated in real time and obviously backed by the on-chain stuff. Now, the reason I think this kind of governance approach would be really good would be, one, it would be really interesting. So I think people would like it a lot, and it would just be a bit of a proof of crypto governance in itself. It would be a bit of a showpiece, but also I think it maybe learns from the lessons that the BCH community has learned in creating the chip process, but adds an on-chain element without it becoming the sort of so-called on-chain governance that you see in other coins, which tends to be really problematic, because if they codify it actually into the code, then once again it becomes about, who codes the code, right? Like there's always, Dash is a classic example that I've always been very skeptical of, where they distribute these on-chain funds thanks to masternode voting, but then there ends up being a small clique who controls, the main proposals that get put forward, and then those are the ones that the masternodes vote on. So they kind of have a stranglehold at a different layer of the ecosystem. So I think there's validity and there's a point in on-chain governance, but we could maybe have a sort of hybrid.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, what do you think the difference between proof of stake and on-chain governance based on ownership of coins or whatever governance tokens? Like, it sounds very similar, really.
I'm going to just jump in here real quick. On-chain governance is a really tricky topic because of a lot of reasons. And NFTs don't solve it, right? So NFTs are a proxy that says, oh, I'm going to signal this. But ultimately, it's just a signal because there's nothing that requires you to run the code or to do the thing that that NFT signifies other than social belief that you are going to do in the future. There's no actual tie of that functionality and the NFT in question. So ultimately, I think that the only way that on-chain governance works is through proof of work. I think that proof of stake can be manipulated because there are people that print money. Just holding coins is not enough of a defense. So like technically, if they had on-chain governance on BTC, Michael Saylor could do whatever he wanted. Is that a good solution? No, that's a terrible solution. Nobody would advocate for that solution. Proof of stake is tragically flawed when you attach it to the monetary value of somebody on the network, because that monetary value is being triggered through other monetary systems that they can cheat with. So they can, if they have a lot of dollars, now they can control Bitcoin. This is a terrible trade-off. This is not something anybody would advocate. So ultimately, the only thing that really matters are enough people running the actual code for this new feature. That's the only thing that can't be Sybiled. And ultimately, that means that the miners need to be able to run that feature and have enough miners that that feature makes sense. And they should be caring about their bottom line, because if they don't, they go out of business. As we've watched multiple mining institutions have to close shop because of price swings since the halvings. So ultimately, they're the most sensitive user on the network. If they fuck up and people decide not to use the network, they're the ones that have the most tangible loss out of everybody on the network. So again, the reinforcements in game theory say that they're the ones that are not going to take the chance. And this is why we've seen stagnation on the biggest networks. It's because they don't take chances. We've seen it empirically. They don't want to make a big change because they care about their bottom line, which ultimately means they're going to be the best layer of defense against putting in arbitrary changes that are not wanted by the community, because they have the most to lose.
But see, that's Josh. That's what I'm saying. Like, is you say that the NFTs are not ultimately like linked to anything. Well, you could back up an NFT with funds that would get burnt somehow if the money. But again, I take your point that that's the kind of like proof of stake style. But what we've developed in the chip process is a quasi system of like reputational proof of work, because if you want to put in a chip, then you get what's they called, expressions of support from people who are sort of influential and known to have been bought into the community. And then if you have a lot of expressions of support and very few or no credible cases against, then that's how the community can figure out. That's also Sybil resistant, right? Because you can't Sybil people who are known in the community, because there's only a certain number of people that are putting in their lives day in, day out to make BCH work over a long period of time.
Of course, you can capture them. So that's the problem with this approach. That not you, but let's say,
but not all of them.
A three-letter organization can capture the key players that have the highest reputations. But this is not the point I wanted to make. I just wanted to make an observation about Sybil resistance and how people can signal and then not follow up. I mean, that's true for miners as well. So miners, when they signal for an activation, that is not actually binding. That's not something where they actually put anything at stake. And if you add let's say prediction markets or whatever futures markets to this, and they can influence the outcome or the positions on these markets by falsely signaling, and can take opposing position and then just say fuck you. That's again seems like a slippery slope of all kind of bad outcomes and hurt possibly. So I just wanted to mention that miner signaling is exactly the same. It's totally non-binding. It's just a social thing.
They'd have to generate a block with the new feature. That's the only signaling that really matters, is that they put an economic interest on the network, proving that they are willing to implement the feature. Signaling means nothing.
Yeah, so
But we can't have a hash war over every upgrade. So clearly you need to have a better system than that.
Well, obviously, and that's why we're really fortunate that we know each other, and the chip process tries to go through all of the different stakeholders in Bitcoin Cash. And we also know that we work together within the full node sphere to try to get the upgrades into the full nodes. And back to before, when we were talking about BCHN, like what happens if a node goes malicious? Well, we saw it. We saw a change go in that the community didn't want, and that's why BCHN exists. It was exactly an illustration of what happens if the community thinks a node did something malicious. Well, it forks, and then a new implementation comes out, and it needs to get a majority of the network, and the network is going to choose which implementation is actually the one that it wants to run. And it's possible for us to transition away from one node that had basically 99% market share or 95% market share to a completely different node as soon as it was seemed that it was implementing features that the network didn't want.
This is the XCC split with Maurice Sachet. For anybody listening who's out of the loop on this, this is not talking about BTC actually at all. What Josh is saying there, just some listeners might not have that context.
Yeah, I think
Kallisti, I don't know.
in this case,
were we going to be able to get some questions maybe as well?
Yeah.
I know some people had wanted to do that.
Yeah, definitely. And so I was just looking at the time too. I mean, I think we're in a good spot, and we've covered a lot of, I think, what I personally wanted to get out of the space. I think this has been really great. A couple people did request speaker and have commented ahead of time that might want to come up. So I want to open the stage specifically to Jerry, Paco VM. And I think there might have been somebody else. If you guys want to come up, you can. I'll give you priority. But otherwise, if anybody else has any kind of questions you want to pose to any of us or any topics you want to bring up, I will open the floor to the entire audience. Just go ahead and request speaker. We have a few slots still. And then I think we'll run the space for, I don't know, maybe another 15 to 30 minutes, depending on how it goes. I probably want to hard stop in the next 45 though. So yeah, if anybody does want to come up, we'll open the floor for that.
And
Also, I cut you off, Matthew, if you wanted to say something.
yeah, thanks. So I want to say that indeed this is a case where history is very important. So if you refer back to the fork map, you see that Bitcoin Cash was in fact very capture resistant. And also to improve the chip process, we just need to increase the number of stakeholders. And this is easier said than done, of course, because you need businesses and organizations and developers and any kind of project and people caring enough about it to look deeply into everything. But that's the key, in my opinion, is to get enough eyes on any proposal, so any possible mistakes can be caught by many people. So I think there's definitely people in this call, in this space right now, who have been like worried that things didn't get enough review. So that's definitely a real thing we should be at least keeping in mind, that we want things to have more rather than less review, and more rather than less stakeholders involved. And of course, when you get as big as BTC, that means that things are hard to change. And I think you see this in many endeavors, even in programming languages like JavaScript. If you want to add a new feature, you need to get broad consensus. And there's many stakeholders and opposing proposals. And then there's the bike shedding about things like syntax. So I think there's many open source and analogies that you can.
Those are not even real consensus systems. Like with Bitcoin, consensus has a completely different way than with almost any other software project, where if you don't like something, you can literally create a fork, and if what you are writing makes sense and it's good and it's usable, people can use it.
I don't agree.
People can use it and get value out of it. I mean, please let me finish. So you can get value out of like a minority fork of JavaScript if you can use it for your project. If like 50 developer can start using it, but you can't actually add 50 people can't actually add like a new opcode that is useful to Bitcoin. That simply doesn't work. That's what I meant by the difference between consensus systems and non-consensus systems. It's very easy to fork and improve on open source projects that are not global consensus systems. Yeah.
Yeah, I think BCH is more aware than literally anyone in the world about the dangers and risks of of splitting consensus. Yeah, it's a very serious issue.
What I love
Yeah, but
about these guys is,
yeah.
please finish.
Yeah, if you take JavaScript again as an example, then yeah, they run JavaScript runs in browser and on backend. So if you make a tweak that's incompatible with the rest of the ecosystem, then it's just the same as adding a new opcode that's not recognized by the rest of the network. You split off, you start your own network effect back from zero. So I think there's many things where there's network effect and a common specification, and if you deviate from the specification, you're on your own new project. So
I mean, I have been dabbling into web development in the earlier days where there was absolutely no real consensus among web browsers on what to implement and how. So and the world still worked, and they still wrestled for dominance and stuff. And somehow that could work because it was not a real consensus system, and also people could just use these weird hacks where you could have written basically in one website you could have optimized or used features of 3 different browsers, and you could have used some meta tags that hinted for them to use this or not use that because they can't understand it, whatever. Let's not dwell on this. What I wanted to say is that what I find extremely funny or interesting is that what I hear from you guys on how governance should be is kind of very similar to how Bitcoin BTC people think and talk about it. And the weird thing is I'm completely disillusioned with this because I see how this has basically failed the goals and purpose of the protocol in effect. How this has led to practically a capture state that I consider a capture state. And again, whether it was done intentionally or not, it doesn't really matter because the end result is that we cannot get meaningful protocol developments. It's in a complete deadlock. And like I said, whatever you just said in the past, I don't know how many minutes about how this should go, it completely resonates with what I hear from BTC people, how governance should go and how things should be done. So that was what was interesting for me. That for a minute I I found it a little bit weird.
Yeah, so it's good to re-emphasize that there is yearly scheduled upgrades or hard fork upgrades. This is very different from Bitcoin BTC. And this also is a shelling point, right? So shelling points are very important. Just like 1 megabyte was like a commitment to a certain number, we have committed to this schedule. And even if 1 year we don't get any upgrades, there's again this timeline for any future upgrades to try this schedule again. So I think that at least helps. And even if we get very big, this as long as this remains like a shelling point, then there is a clear roadmap for a timeline people need to follow to get their changes into consensus. And it's true that things do ossify, so it becomes harder to do breaking changes as you get bigger. But this doesn't need to be a problem per se, just the way that network effect works.
Yes, I mean, it all depends how much work you can get done before that happens to you, I guess.
I mean, I really think the answer to most social problems is having expectations set ahead of time. And I mean, even what I really think in terms of anarchy is, even in the most anarchist environment, there's still going to be some kind of implicit governance. You can't ever get rid of governance, even though you can kind of get rid of government. And that's because, if I'm talking to you face to face, there's probably at least an implicit social contract that I'm not just going to randomly punch you in the face or something. I mean, I guess that could happen, but the expectation is that we're civil humans, right? So in the same,
I got to watch out for Kallisti at the next meetup. I'm going to be like standing 2 meters back, make sure I got a bit of extra space there. Like last time he was holding a glass of wine and shit. I was like right in his face. Damn.
Stay out of my range, man. You never know.
He's got some reach.
Kind of like in the same way, though, of the governance process for Bitcoin. And the same way we keep talking about, just run the code, right? Well, there's got to be a social contract set ahead of time, and that's even what our latest upgrade ABLA was about. Is about setting expectations ahead of time, because we already know that there's this social attack vector through the block size. We've already lived that history. Why would we open ourselves to repeat that? And again, we can get something like ABLA, and I think, like I said earlier, kind of because we are an underdog, right? If we were the size of BTC today, would it have been as easy to do that? Or I guess flip that on its head, would we ever get as big as BTC without that? I don't know, but the point really being, if chip is a set of expectations, right? ABLA is a set of expectations that lets us predictably interact with the ecosystem, and it's the predictability that adds the stability to the way that we do things. And I think because BTC governance is not predictable in the same way, we don't know what criteria is required in order to get something pushed. I think that's really the key.
Suppose that
there's a
this
steel
is
man
done
for
on
both
purpose.
sides, right?
Sorry, suppose
there's a let me say something real quick. There's a steel man for both sides, right? Like a skill issue type statement. You know, BCH, and as Josh has brought up in the past, and the relevant point of, can the chip work as the network effect grows and the network grows and the number of stakeholders grows? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe it has to evolve and so forth. So, you know, we'll see. That's the steel man. We're going to see if BCH can continue to evolve its governance and make things continue to work smoothly and well, and move on towards, you know, global money. And then on the BTC side, right, it's like there's a question of a split. Basically, are you, if you can never get the things in that you want to get in, what are you going to do? Like, what's going to happen there? Or can you actually get something in? So yeah, there's going to be there's future challenges and uncertainties for both of these.
I mean, it's a very different situation when they tell you in your face that you will never ever get anything that you actually think is like conducive to freedom tech or peer-to-peer cash or just scaling immutable property rights or whatever you want, right? If they tell you that you will never, if they tell you that you will never have these because they will not allow it, then your game is completely different than when they are basically luring you in with these promises that if you walk the walk and be patient, then you are eventually going to be rewarded with the features that you may want, and that's kind of I am afraid the game that is being played here. That there are narratives that just don't work out in practice, and when they don't work out in practice for long enough, then the narratives of course shift. But by that time, you have wasted half your life, and you could have done something else somewhere else, and you have wasted years and invested a lot of effort into trying to move something forward, right? And you basically feel cheated by this in the end. So that's what I wanted to mention, that these things may or may not work. It completely depends on like other people, and you don't actually control other people.
Paco VM in the comments was saying he's trying to get listener, but X won't let him. He has a question. What are the differences between the chip and bit processes, and what both bands think one should copy from the other? I guess BCHers, do we feel like there's anything from BIP that we can gain? And I suppose Floppy and Moonsettler, do you feel like there would be benefit to adopting a process like chip?
I believe I actually have an FAQ article. If you look on bitcoincashpodcast.com/FAQs, and there's one called How Does BCH Governance Work or something like that. And there's a section there that compares the BIP and the chip process. So from, and I did like a rundown of it. It's not very long, but as far as I know, the difference is essentially that a BIP process has to operate through the kind of gatekeepers, quote unquote. Supposedly not, but in reality, yes, as we've seen with the Taproot wizards struggling to get a BIP number assigned, is that there's kind of a repository and you have to get a number assigned in there, and then you somehow sort of magically build up consensus and then you get it shipped. Now, the idea is that's for technical changes. With chips, the difference is that it doesn't have to be a technical change, although there isn't a lot of great precedent for it. I infamously tried to make a chip to change the upgrade day to Saturdays, and even though there was some contention about that, nobody actually disagreed with the idea that I could make a chip about that, which was very interesting. So a chip doesn't have to be a actual technical change to the protocol. In theory, it can be used to do anything, whereas I believe a BIP has to be a specific technical implementation. The other difference is that the chips are determined by expressions of support from members of the community that have a proven interest in that part of the community, and are refuted also by those expressions of support until it hits. There's no defined threshold because there's not really a countable number, but it just builds up to an apparent point at which it's obvious that consensus is going to occur, and that happens along a timeline with a specific person in charge of addressing complaints, whoever it is that wants to do it. Whereas with the BIPs, it can be a bit more amorphous, like somebody could be a BIP author, but then some other people are kind of in favor of it and some aren't, and it's not always tracked really that well, who's in favor, who's against. There's usually a lot of arguing on the BIP, the Bitcoin Core repo, and they've now got a Bitcoin Meta repo as well, so you can argue even more there. So I think that's a summary of the differences. In terms of what do I think each side can learn, I think that probably what the chip process or what the BCH side can learn from the BIP process, which partly we already have because that was just how the history played out, but also is what we were just discussing, is basically size. The BIP process is trying to accommodate a much larger pool of interested people, and we've also seen recently with changes to the Bitcoin dev list and so forth, like the where and how you discuss the changes is often as important as the changes themselves. And at the moment, the BCH community does a pretty good job of moderating that across Bitcoin Cash research is where a lot of it starts, but it also happens throughout other venues. And so I think we should really pay attention to what's happening with the BIP process in terms of replicating that. As the community grows, we're going to need to be able to have ability for people to contribute through several venues. So that would be my answer.
Okay. One thing I wanted to add is that there is a stillman for having a process. Although I'm really in a rebellious mood right now, and I'm saying inflammatory things about the BIP process especially, the argument is that it's very easy to run a denial of service on the attention capacity of humans. Like if you would see a new chip, like let's say 100 new chip each day, who would be able to reasonably keep up with that? And let's say these large language models, these random bullshit generators are getting more advanced by the year, and let's say someone for the fun of it starts running these bullshit generators to generate new chips that don't really make any sense, but you have to spend hours and hours into getting into it to realize that this is basically complete ChatGPT bullshit. And kind of having gatekeepers and having this social aspect and having a process and stuff like that is basically acting as trying to act as a severe resistance protocol from this attack aspect. I just wanted to add that I do recognize this problem, and this is something that did not fully present itself either in Bitcoin or in Bitcoin Cash, but it's entirely possible that it will in the future. Right now, we are mostly seeing the downsides of this thing in Bitcoin, I believe. So a lot of proposals have been made, and basically they are all stuck in this limbo, this graveyard of BIPs, and the authors are made to jump through hoops year after year, and the goalposts keep moving. It's very easy to basically just waste their times for many years without in the end any real chance that they had over getting their BIPs even merged to the repo or their code to core. And like you always said before, you can just release your own client, and if you manage to gather enough popular support, it's probably going to make it into the protocol. But it's very hard to do. Again, human creatures are inherently political, and they are inherently followers, and there are key figures in each community that they will look at for signaling. And if these people signal maliciously or just wrongly by accident, or they just can't keep up and don't pay attention and don't do their jobs, then the whole process is basically just a giant deadlock that you can't really get out of it without just tossing it into the garbage bin.
I have a response to that, and then I want to let Floppy talk, who has his hand up. So in terms of the denial of service on human attention, yeah, let's talk about a theoretical reality where a bunch of LLMs spam, let's say, the Bitcoin Cash Research Forum. We've got thousands of chips coming in. I think the mitigation to that is twofold. One, the default answer to any change is already no. We're already kind of pre-ossified in that way, right? You have to actually convince people that your change is a good change in order for it to get implemented into any node, or somebody has to actually write that code and prove using data that it's a good idea. And then second, it's the whole concept of the whole proof of work aspect, the proof of reputation. Like there's a big difference between LLM generated Joe Schmoes proposing chips versus if anybody who's up here as speaker, even you guys proposing a chip, because you have actual history. Even if you're anon, like you're doxed in the way of, we know what kind of projects you've worked on, we know who you are and what you talk about and how active you are on the socials and all that kind of thing. And you can even give me a freaking pub key to prove that Moon Settler that's posting on Bitcoin Cash Research is the same Moon Settler I'm talking to now, right? So we have that already. And I think if we were getting spammed with thousands of chips per day, we would just go to another venue where there's actual signal, and we'll just prove who we are to each other that way, and we'll just kind of resume business as usual.
Yeah, that's kind of the things. That's kind of where things are going. And again, what I'm hearing is kind of exactly the same. Like the thinking is very similar in among Bitcoin developers and people who are looking at Bitcoin developers for signal and like you said, reputation and proof of work. And the interesting thing I wanted to add to this is there are actual cases when big names add proposals, publish proposals under a pseudonym. They have alter egos that are less reputational, and they are doing this on purpose because they want the proposal to look that on merit and not tainted by the reputation. These things I'm pretty sure actually have happened. So that's an interesting other way to look at it.
Go ahead, Floppy.
I don't think there is any defined process to activate soft forks in Bitcoin. And there's always going to be some politics in this process. And you can expect more politics in future, considering the kind of mainstream Bitcoin has already gone. You can see real politicians coming to Bitcoin events. So I don't expect less politics in future. And the BIP process is not really something you have to follow in Bitcoin. These are just documents that can even be maintained in your own repository or anywhere. For example, I'm working on a BIP and it won't be, I am not going to open a pull request to add this BIP in the official BIP repository, and it will be a document that anybody can look or maybe maintain or make changes by just forking the repository uh, using the link which I share. So these are just documents and can be maintained anywhere.
Yeah, definitely. And we also do that here with the chip process too, because we can point to some recent examples. The ABLA chip was maintained on GitLab on Bitcoin Cash Autist's account. The Cash Tokens chip was maintained on GitHub on BitJSON's account. Um, I think Matthew has custody of the targeted limits chip. I'm not sure. Correct me if I'm wrong there. And then, for instance, Flowy has a few chips that he hosts on Codeberg. And at the end of the day, they are all just documents. We don't even have chip numbers necessarily. We just go with the date of when we thought of the chip, and that's the chip number. So, like if I were to make a chip right now to try to get shielded transactions into BCH, I would just call it, 2024-08 shielded transactions, and that's it. And I would host it on my same GitLab that I host Selene on.
And
yeah,
that was
so the
intentional.
VM limits is
That wasn't
chip.
that wasn't an accident. The decision to do that was explicitly a learned lesson from BIP, because we absolutely did not want to have any kind of gatekeepers, and so that's why the naming is that way.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say that
Nice.
the VM limits chip and all the work and test vectors is being done by Jason Dreisner. I made a chip for the emulated arithmetic and how we could do like a mul-diff to emulate higher order arithmetic. But I'm very glad that I'm able to retract it now that we have a good big-int proposal with very thorough research and integrated into the VM limits testing. So I guess, yeah, I can officially make that retracted, officially and unofficially, of course. But yeah.
Again, so what is happening in theory with the BIP process, it's very much the same what you guys are saying. The only difference is that there is a very defined formal requirements, like a set of formal requirements that you have to make sure that your proposal conforms to even get the number assigned and get merged. And of course, getting the BIP merged into the BIP repo does nothing, just acknowledges that you met these minimum requirements. It does not mean endorsement. It does not mean anyone will implement it. It just means that the proposal meets these requirements, and then it gets merged. And there is nothing on the face of it that is a problem with this. And I think pretty much anyone can agree that this might be like a good thing. But somehow, how the whole thing works out, I believe is still somehow contrary to purpose and detrimental in effect. Like all the nice things that people make up about how this should function and what is the purpose of it somehow still manages to devolve into pretty apparent gatekeeping. And I'm not sure how, because again, I'm hearing very much the same things from basically both camp of developers on how things should work, and they obviously don't work the same way in effect.
And I think that's something you should really pay attention to, Moonslider, because there is an obvious, very different outcome, right? Even though you say they look the same, they're really not the same. And I think I don't want to say it in a mean way, but I don't really think you've understood the chip process, because we know very firsthand, right, how dysfunctional things were in the past. From our perspective on BTC, but also on BCH, right? So we've learned a lot of lessons, and chip is nothing like BIP. It's a huge evolution from my perspective. It's a huge evolution from the BIP process, and I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned in it. And I would say if there's just one thing to say, what's the difference? It's what Mathieu said, which is the chip process is a shelling point. BTC's shelling point, I don't know how to say this
in
without
your
being
opinion, that's fine.
controversial, but there is a shelling point on BTC, but it's not the BIP process.
The shelling point of BTC is what you guys said, that the default answer to any proposal is no. And the goalpost can be arbitrarily moved. That's the shelling point.
No, because plenty of changes have happened, right? SegWit happened, Taproot happened, RBF by default happened. Lots of things have changed. So no, the shelling point is something else, which I won't get into because it's not going to be very productive. But yeah, I would say the one thing that's different that you should really look at is the shelling point. What's the shelling point on BCH? Why is it that the chip process works? If you set aside scale, right? Because that's not really provable one way or the other whether things are going to work when they are bigger. Yeah, but the outcomes are very different. So look for why they're different.
Nice. Can you guys hear me because my app is about to freeze up?
Yeah, I can start here.
Yes.
Okay, nice.
We can hear you.
So yeah, really, I can't claim that I understand the chip process. I would not claim that. So you are completely right about that. I don't get it. I agree with that 100%. I'm not sure I get the bit process. I'm just very suspicious of it because I see what it resulted in. I will try to look into the chip process, and if some of you are willing to take the time and maybe talk about it, maybe in a space or something in the future, then I would very much like that.
Absolutely. And once again, bitcoincashpodcast.com/FAQs. There's info there about governance and how it works and links that you can check it out. And I think that should be helpful at least. But obviously, yeah, also happy to discuss it further. But there's a lot of resources about it to start with.
And up in the nest, I did, and also in the comments, I posted chip process. There's the actual chips.md, which is the actual definition of the chip process. It's on GitLab. And it really gives you a very comprehensive overview of everything that it's about and how it works.
Do we have another question?
I think it'd be remiss to skip over something I think is really important to state, right? Is that both the BIP and chip process are voluntary processes that are not required in any shape or form when it comes to the actual protocol, the governance in the protocol, how it works. Ultimately, it boils down to the people that are writing code, part of the ecosystem, the way they deal with one another. It's a very human thing that is impossible to work around. The reason the chip process works for Bitcoin Cash is because the people in Bitcoin Cash want to talk to each other and try to figure out these solutions and are willing to add things to the chain. There is a fundamental difference in belief systems of the people involved. And that's why it's nice to have a open market of currencies, right? We have different choices we can, because different people are going to be writing code, different people are going to be key developers, different people are going to bundle together on different currencies with different points of view. These are just processes. If the people behind Bitcoin Cash suddenly changed within the next 5 years, there's nothing forcing the chip process to be the same way. The reason it works is because we as a community want it to work that way. There is no getting around the people. There is no getting around the developers that are writing the code. This is a fantasy. Anybody that thinks that somehow a process is going to override the belief systems of the people that are actively working on the chain or doing other things, it's always going to boil down to them. Always. Because without someone to write the code and implement those features in wallets, inside of full nodes, etc., then it doesn't happen. You can't wave a magic wand and then magically a feature appears in the chain. It always is going to land on the more technical people in the community. There's no avoiding that. It is a fantasy to think that that can be avoided. But what happens is those things mature differently on different chains because of different ways of looking at protocol development, different things that people care about when listening to the community, and different communities are going to handle how they deal with one another differently because we're humans.
Yeah. How do we think about, do you want to get into it or we should wrap it up? How do we think about, multiple implementations of a protocol, like, multiple repos, multiple teams, multiple maybe communities trying to work on a single consensus code? Is that something that allows for more development or a more diverse set of features, or actually is contrary to that? What is your experience?
So I
That's
think
another
that
showing point. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I think it leads to more experimentation and more flexibility in certain ways, and then also is much more difficult when it comes to staying in consensus together. And so I'm going to give a couple of examples. You know, obviously I worked with Chris Pacia on BCHD, which fell out of sync, and we're trying to get that fixed now. OpReturn has actually got a build that is working on chain with cash token support that is working right now, but it's not all reviewed. And keeping very different code bases in sync across large numbers of changes is a giant pain in the ass. I'm just going to start there. But we wouldn't have ever seen the first neutrino implementation for Bitcoin Cash because that happened in BCHD. And people were able to test out what those types of wallets looked like. So when it comes down to the flexibility to show someone a big change, work on a chip, whatever, the likelihood of them being blocked to be able to do that technical demo is non-existent. That blocker no longer exists. They have more avenues to be able to implement that. And I think that that's a huge win when you're trying to show someone how something works, especially on a test net, especially when you're trying to get more consensus around a certain feature, making it to other nodes. But at the same time, there's a huge cost. And what I've noticed is that the different full nodes, the same devs end up working together to a huge degree, right? So it seems like it's all decentralized, but it's like, it's more decentralized. But is
At the
it
end of the
perfect?
day, we
Far
still have
from
Linus
it,
Torvalds.
right? So like you have like, for instance, Kalen is working on BCHN, and he also works on Fulcrum. He works on a bunch of different projects. And then you have developers like Flowy the Hub was an example, right? They haven't stayed in sync the whole time, but Xander's always involved, and he's always looking at code reviews for other projects. He's actively involved on all of them. Fernando from Argentina, again, someone that you see regularly pop up, whether no matter which implementation or full node is being discussed. Somehow you see the same people, and a lot of times they're helping each other with patches across multiple implementations. So it's not like there's this dedicated team that works on this node and a totally different team that works on this node. There's always a pretty big overlap on the change sets and a lot of porting between the implementations, which makes the decentralized argument to me a little flat.
I'd like to say the thing about the cost, and it's a huge pain in the ass, is absolutely, that was the first thing I was going to say as well. But then there's not only the benefits that you mentioned about decentralization to some degree, but also just it's a matter of exercising muscles, right? So if you know, when ABC went nuts and started wanting to put tax on BCH, if we didn't already have that shelling point that having multiple implementations is basically per se a good thing, then probably would have been a much harder situation, right? We would have been in a much worse shape because we would have had zero exercise on those muscles of you know, what does it mean to run an implementation? What does it mean to convince people, convince miners to run a node and so forth, that kind of thing. So having exercised those muscles, I think, is part of the reason that BCH survived that. If we didn't have it, I'm not sure we would have. So there's benefits in addition to the decentralization.
And I also
I keep thinking that it might be nice for decentralization, but again, it's always in the back of my mind that maybe this is how we ossify Bitcoin in the end. That some adversarial situation arises where node implementations that can't agree on anything, basically, so they have to stuck with the already established consensus rules as common language, but they don't agree about anything else. Gain like some sort of turf war like you know, adoption, something that you saw with like Wasabi and Samurai or something like that, right? So it becomes a very tribal thing, and they will never cooperate with each other, and some situation like that, I believe, can lead to the final ossification of Bitcoin. But on the other hand, what you said about experimentation and freedom and stuff like that also seems very reasonable and logical.
I think the main thing with that is just getting hung up on the name Bitcoin. And yeah, there's the network effect that we have to keep into account. But in the same way that we can chain split into BTC, BCH, and our other two siblings, we could also just mass defect to Monero tomorrow, right? And that has nothing to do with Bitcoin. So it's really the market will speak, as we always like to say.
Yeah, I agree. I just wanted to say that
The
if there's like, there's evils on both sides, right? Excess of just one node on one chain that everyone follows is bad, and then excess of like 16,000 nodes that people run, like different node implementations, is also bad, right? Because then they can't agree on anything. But I think you definitely don't want to be with just one node implementation on a chain, because then it just gives one dev team too much power, and then they then become corrupt, or they can become corrupt. So if you have the culture in your chain where the people just expect to be able to run multiple nodes, I think that's good. I don't know. My 2 cents.
I mean, to me, that's the essence of Bitcoin metagame, and I'm never going to stop harping on that term, and I'm never going to stop using that hashtag, and I'm going to keep compiling this idea there. All right, so we're coming up on 6 o'clock Eastern. Means we've been in the space for about 3 hours. I think it's been a great discussion so far. I want to start wrapping it up. Vlad, you've been awfully quiet. Are you still there? He might not be there. I was going to ask, since he's been listening, if he had any thoughts on the discussion overall as kind of our wild card here in the space. But if he's not there, then I guess we'll skip that. So then, if anyone else has some closing thoughts, maybe. I think this has been a really productive space. I've been really happy to talk to Reardon, Floppy, and Moonsettler. Hopefully the audience got some value out of this, getting to learn about what's going on both sides of this fence, without us really having to get too deep in the weeds about the historical stuff. I think maybe that might be something we can talk about from an informative lens in the future. Maybe we can invite some people up and kind of get a little more into the philosophy of it without necessarily having to convince everyone right or wrong. It's really like we can learn from each other's experiences in a lot of the way that we've discussed today. What different forms of governance work, how does this metagame work, how do we get things implemented, who's in charge around here, right? All of these kind of questions are important and are definitely part of the technical process of how we improve Bitcoin. I think it might be a fruitful discussion to try to tackle in the future. But yeah, does anyone else have...
Also the scaling, right? We have danced around the big elephant in the room very successfully for 3 hours, because I guess if there are significantly different views among the two developer groups, it probably is about the scalability of the Bitcoin system and how to actually scale this. So that might actually worth another 3 hours in the future.
Yeah, and hopefully, people who come in and listen to this recording later can see, we can actually have these discussions maturely. The people that we think are hurting us are not actually in the room with us right now, right? And that's on both sides. There's no Roger, Craig, or Adam in this room right now with us. We can focus on ourselves and what we're doing in the present day and what we need to do going forward. I don't think we need to dive into the history too much. We got books on that already. Go read The Block Size War. Go read Hijacking Bitcoin. Use your own fucking brain. Think about what's right and what's wrong, and just do your own research. You don't need us to tell you.
Yeah, it was pretty funny that basically I was the most unhinged one in this space. Maybe
that's probably. I mean,
I don't know, man. I'm a contender for number 2 there.
Yeah, I mean, other than Callan, who literally just came into space, took
Leroy
speakers, and went
Jenkins
guns
in here.
blazing. But Moonsetter, honestly, I kind of low-key expected that to kind of be the case, and really I wanted you personally to kind of be in that contrarian space, because I know your personal observations on everything have been, a little bit pessimistic. You haven't kind of coming to those same conclusions that we came to back in 2017. And so you're really better positioned to share your experience as somebody who's actually gone through the trenches in present day on the BTC side, to talk to the other BTC people and say what you're thinking. And so I think that's really important, because it's different coming from somebody that you're already aligned with versus all these green guys just shoving our propaganda down your throat all day, every day, right? So I think hopefully the goal here was for everybody to get value out of this discussion one way or another. And it's not to convince anybody of anything. It's just to say, hey, here's where we are today in August 2024, without necessarily having to look back so much. It's good to see a little bit how we got here, but really I'm more interested in what's the future of Bitcoin, because we all have that influence today. And none of the people who influenced Bitcoin back then are really there today, except for the OGs that decided to join us today. So I think it's really important to be forward looking.
And thanks, Kallisti, for doing a good job in getting everyone together.
Yeah, thanks.
For this space, been really good. And hopefully we'll do a part 2 or a follow-up. And anybody who's listening who has any follow-up questions, obviously you can drop that on Twitter and people will comment. Or if you like this or didn't like this, feel free to message anybody involved about it, and maybe we'll do it, but with some different changes, or maybe we'll run it back the exact same next time. Depends on the feedback we get. So thank you all for listening.
All right, and that's a clean break here at 6:01 Eastern. I appreciate everyone for coming. Thank you so much. It's been a great space, and I love talking to all of you guys at any time. If we ever want to do it again, let's get it together. And of course, the tweets, the DMs, the telegrams, etc., are all open. And one last thing, shill o'clock, try Selene wallet, Kallisti.cash. It's the best wallet in all of crypto, period. All right, time to rug the space. Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.